Georgians go to the polls in today's decisive final chapter of the 2022 midterms. Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer.
And I'm Aaron Burnett, and this is CNN's special coverage of election night in America continued. This is the runoff election that will determine the balance of power in the U.S. Senate.
Just 3 hours of voting left for most of the state. Senator Raphael Warnock is defending his seat against Republican Herschel Walker. The stakes today for Democrats enormous. An outright majority in the U.S. Senate instead of a 50-50 tie. Full control of committees and more power to conduct investigations.
And Wolf, the challenge for Republicans is getting voters to the polls today, overcoming a traditionally Democratic advantage in early voting, which set a record for midterms in Georgia this time. That and persuading voters for the state's Republican governor, who turned up their noses at Walker in November, to actually give him another look and vote for him this time, Wolf.
And Aaron, we have reporters at polling places and with the Warnock and Walker campaigns as well as our own John King. He's over at the Magic Wall. Plus, coverage of today's momentous decision by the House January Select Committee to refer criminal charges over to the U.S. Justice Department. That's major news. We begin, though, with Georgia right now. CNN's Diane Gallagher is in Atlanta for us. Diane, I understand with two minor exceptions, polls will close in about 3 hours or so from now. So far today, what have you seen as far as turnout is concerned?
Wolf, turnout has been steady but easy for voters. We're talking about very smooth experiences across most of the state with a wait time that hovered somewhere between 1.5 and 3 minutes almost everywhere on average. Here at this Southwest Atlanta location, people came in, they voted. The biggest issue that we ran into were people who thought this was their precinct, but it wasn't, and they were confusing it with early voting locations, something that has been quite common across the Atlanta area here. We spoke with many of the voters who said that they showed up today because they tried to vote early during that compressed 5-day mandated early voting period, but the lines were just too long. So they said they took a gamble to vote on Election Day. Now, according to the Secretary of State's office, more than 800,000 Georgians have already cast their ballots. They admitted that's probably a conservative estimate, and we should be hearing from the Secretary of State soon with another update on those numbers. Of course, you mentioned almost 1.9 million early votes as well, as these campaigns continue to try and push for turnout on Election Day.
Diane Gallagher on the scene for us in Atlanta. Thank you very much. Let's go next to CNN's Jeff Zeleny. He's over at the Herschel Walker headquarters. Jeff, Election Day turnout is always obviously very important in Georgia and other states as well. Just how vital is that portion of the vote expected to be today to the Herschel Walker campaign?
Well, if Election Day turnout is absolutely essential to Herschel Walker's chances today, and here is why. As Diane was just saying there, the early vote in Georgia has been quite robust. 1.8 million Georgians have cast votes early, but a good share of those are believed to be Democratic voters who likely supported Senator Raphael Warnock. So the Walker campaign tells me that they have to have a robust turnout today, people going to the polls across the state to cast those ballots to make up some of the difference from that early vote. And that is one of the after-action reports being discussed even before the polls closed, that there's some consternation. Should Republicans have been more forthright and more eager to vote early? The Walker campaign was actually pushing early voting, advertising early voting, but there is some skepticism among the ranks of some Republicans just because of the questions of election denialism over the years about early voting. But the Walker campaign believes that it is getting out its vote. The sun is shining in parts of Georgia today. It's not here in Atlanta. We're outside the College Football Hall of Fame, where the former football great is going to have his election party today, Wolf. But of course, he was recruited into this race by the former President Donald Trump, and his chances rely on early vote. His chances rely on the turnout today at the polls. So certainly Republicans are not feeling quite as confident as Democrats, but there's still 3 hours left to vote here in Georgia, Wolf.
Jeff Zeleny on the scene for us as well. All right, Jeff, thank you very much. CNN's Eva McKend is also in Atlanta. She's over at Warnock headquarters for us. She joins us right now. Eva, what are you hearing from inside the Warnock camp earlier today?
Well, good afternoon to you, Wolf. Yes, you are right. I am at Warnock headquarters. I feel like I have a bit of a deja vu here because I was in the exact same place 4 weeks ago. I want to talk to you about what I saw today. I was in Cobb County. I was in Atlanta. And what I saw was just a steady stream of voters coming in and out. Some really surprised that they did not have to wait in line. You know, the early vote period was really characterized by these long lines. That is not what I saw today. We also heard from Democrats that they were worried about the weather going into today. Well, you know, voters I spoke with, primarily black voters in Atlanta, they told me, you know, given the legacy in this country, there was no way that they were going to miss showing up today. Many of those Democrats supporting Senator Warnock. For the candidates' part, Herschel Walker, Senator Warnock out on the trail today, making that final pitch, telling their supporters, if they have not already done so, to get out and vote. We have 3 hours left until the polls close. And even at this critical hour, there are still volunteers making phone calls, imploring folks to get out and vote. Wolf?
Eva, thank you very, very much. We'll, of course, get back to you. Aaron, lots at stake right now.
I know, Wolf. I mean, it is incredible to think about it. Here we are 4 weeks later and everything on the line for the Senate. John King's at the Magic Wall. So, John, what are you watching today as we see this, you know, what's playing out in terms of turnout across the state of Georgia?
One last time, Aaron, this is the final chapter of the 2022 midterms. You see Walker versus Warnock, a two-person race in the runoff now. This will start to fill in about 3 hours from now. Let's go back 4 weeks ago to just remind people of why we're here. We are here because Senator Warnock got 49.4%, could not get above 50%. Herschel Walker right behind him at 48.5%. The Libertarian candidate is no more. He got more than 2% of the vote right there. So now you have the two-man race. So what are you looking for? Number one, most of the state's population is right up here. Atlanta and the suburbs around it. So that's the most important place to look in the votes tonight. And again, going back to the race, staying here a month ago is instructive in the sense that for Senator Warnock, your base is Fulton County. That's Atlanta. It's the black base of the Democratic Party. It's the #1 county in the state by far. And you see he got nearly 74% of the vote there a month ago. He needs to match that number, maybe even juice it up a little bit tonight if he wants to get on a path to victory. If you are Herschel Walker, I'm going over to Cobb County. You say, why are you going there for Herschel Walker? Warnock got nearly 60% of the vote, 57% of the vote there just a month ago. This is what is key for Herschel Walker. Can he perform better in the suburbs this time than he did a month ago? And here's the comparison. You see Herschel Walker with 40%, 41% if you want to round that up in Cobb County. Look at Brian Kemp, the governor. The Republican governor was reelected. He got 47% in the same county. The Republicans don't have to win these suburban counties around Atlanta. They just have to run competitively. Kemp gets 47. Walker gets 40. This is Fulton County. You come through here, then come over to another one of the big suburban counties north and east of Atlanta. This is Gwinnett County. It's the second largest county in the state. Again, Herschel Walker got 39% a month ago. Governor Kemp, 44%. The margins matter. Can Herschel Walker get more of those votes in the suburbs? Can Brian Kemp, who has endorsed Walker in the runoff, was nowhere near Walker in the general election, can his turnout operation help? So you look at the blue suburbs around Atlanta, and then, Aaron, let me just get rid of that so it's not distracting. Then you look a little bit more up into the ex-urban counties. These are absolutely critical for Republicans. Take Cherokee County, for example, 7th largest county in the state. Brian Kemp gets 74% a month ago. Herschel Walker gets 67%. So even in the red counties, Herschel Walker was underperforming Brian Kemp. It's a simple math tonight. Can Herschel Walker improve his performance? We know the Democrats have an advantage in the early vote. Now we see if today Herschel Walker not only has to win the election day vote today, he needs to win it big.
Right. And so when you talk about those margins and how Herschel Walker needs to make those up for victory tonight, on the other side, black voter turnout, you know, has been crucial in this race. So what are you seeing there? And I know it's sort of hard now to parse between what you saw in early voting, which of course was records across the board, and what we're actually seeing today on election day. How do you read between the lines?
So Eva teed it up really well. It's a shorter early voting period. Democrats are happy. They believe they have an advantage in the early voting, but they also have a list. Who didn't vote early? You have to get them out. And when it comes to the black vote, that's going to be starting right here in Fulton County, the most important piece of the Democratic Party, right here, the black vote here, but increasingly in the suburbs as well. And just again, if you're talking about a race on the margin, you want to turn out the black vote down here in Muskogee County. This is the Columbus area around here. And Senator Warnock, his headquarters is in Atlanta tonight, but he is from Savannah. So in the Savannah area, he has localized ads here saying, hey, I am one of you. In Chatham County, it's the 5th largest county in the state. So we'll look at Atlanta and the suburbs. When it comes to the black vote, though, you see what the blue is down here in the rural areas as well. There are pockets everywhere. Early vote helped. The question for the Warnock campaign, can you deliver on Election Day the voters you know you need the most?
This is going to be crucial here, and as we've said now, less than 3 hours until almost all the polls close. A couple will be staying open a little bit later. And we've got much more of our special coverage of the Georgia runoff election tonight. But first, the breaking news. The verdict just in against the Trump companies and the fallout to come. And this was a pretty incredible verdict tonight. We're also live on Capitol Hill, the House January 6th committee deciding it will refer criminal charges to the Justice Department, plus the special counsel in the Trump investigations issuing his first subpoenas. Also, what Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has to say, finally, about a former president with no respect for the Constitution that they both swore an oath to defend and uphold. Welcome back to our special election coverage of Election Night in America continued. We're counting down to the polls closing in Georgia. But first, the breaking news. A Manhattan jury just moments ago returning its verdict against the companies bearing Donald Trump's name. Guilty on all counts. CNN's Kara Scannell has the very latest and joins us now. So this literally just happening, Kara. Can you tell me exactly what the verdict is and what the Trump companies have been found guilty of?
Yeah, Aaron, so this just came down moments ago after about 2 full days of deliberations. This jury of 8 men and 4 women came back with counts of finding the Trump Organization companies guilty across all counts. So there were 2 entities charged, and the jury found them each guilty of the following: a scheme to defraud, conspiracy, 3 counts of tax fraud, and multiple counts of falsifying business records. This all relates to a 15-year tax fraud scheme where the company is now found guilty of doling out off-the-books compensation to a number of its top executives. That was company paid for apartments, car leases, and in the case of the former chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, the private school tuition of his grandchildren. Now, according to prosecutors, this was a win-win. The company was able to pay less in taxes and less in salary to its employees, and those employees, they paid less in their own taxes. So this was a trial that has lasted now. We're in our 7th week. The prosecution had called 5 witnesses, and the star witness for them was really Alan Weisselberg. He had pleaded guilty to 15 counts, admitting to his crimes in this 15-year tax fraud scheme, but he walked a fine line in his testimony. He told the prosecutors and the jury that he had conducted the scheme with other people at the Trump Organization, but he said he did not scheme or conspire with any members of the Trump family. Of course, the former president was not charged in this case, but prosecutors said that they believe he actually solicited some of this fraud. Aaron?
All right, Kara, thank you very much with the breaking details here. Joining me now, Elliot Williams, CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor. Okay, Elliot, I understand that there's going to be fines here, maybe $1.6 million. We'll get to the sentencing. But when you talk about these entities, these corporate entities with Trump's name on them are charged. They're found guilty of helping individuals, right, individuals to conduct tax fraud. So what does this mean? Are any individuals going to pay a price?
No, they're really not, Aaron. At the end of the day, look, for the purposes of criminal law, a corporation is sort of treated like a person and can be charged with a crime and so on. Now, if you are to take a corporation down, what are the kind of things that could undo a corporation? Major fines and, tens of millions of dollars, or sending many people to jail from a corporation. That's just not happening here. Most Americans don't ever see $1.6 million in their lives. But this is certainly not a significant financial hit for the Trump Organization. Look, it might be embarrassing for it as a company, but this is not going to cease the Trump Organization as a business entity.
Okay, so I guess the next question is then, does it change really anything about how it operates, organizes, or how much money Trump can make from it? And is there any chance that he or his children, who also are executives at the company, right, yeah, Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric, will pay any financial or criminal price?
Nothing major here. Now, it bears mentioning that the New York State Attorney General has a $250 million civil lawsuit against the family. Look, in civil court, there's a lower standard for getting evidence in. They could be made to pay there down the road, but nothing today is going to lead to anything major or significant for either the Trump Organization or the individuals in the Trump family.
All right. Well, this is the analysis that matters so much when you get a headline like that. Elliot, thank you very much. Wolf.
Aaron, there's also big news here in Washington at this hour. The January 6th Select Committee announcing just a little while ago it will make what are called formal criminal referrals to the U.S. Department of Justice. The panel's chairman, Benny Thompson, declining to say which individuals will be subject to these referrals or how many he expects the panel to make. But it's now clear the committee has found evidence of crimes as part of its investigation into the 2020 election. Let's go to CNN's Sarah Murray. She's part of the team that actually broke this story here on CNN. So what more can you tell us, Sarah?
Well, Wolf, Benny Thompson, who's the chair of the committee, told us a little bit earlier today that the committee will make criminal referrals. Now, this is a big deal. You know, it means that this committee believes they have collected enough evidence that a crime was committed. That referral then goes to the Department of Justice. Of course, DOJ doesn't take their cues from Congress. They're moving ahead with their own investigation, but it is a significant step, a culmination of the committee's work. The committee put out a statement today saying that they're going to deal with the specifics of this in the coming days. So that gets to, you know, what's the predicate of these criminal referrals going to be? Who is actually going to be on this list for potential criminal referrals? A source tells our team that this will focus on the main organizers and leaders of the attack at the U.S. Capitol. That's really what the point that these committee members want to drive home when they finally release these criminal referrals, Wolf.
Significant development indeed. All right, Sarah, we're going to get back to you. We're following all of these developments. Right now, I want to bring in Mark Preston, CNN senior political analyst, Audie Cornish, CNN anchor and correspondent. Also with us still, Elliot Williams, CNN legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, and Jamie Gangel, CNN special correspondent, is with us as well. Jamie, the January 6th Select Committee saying these criminal referrals are going forward, as you know, based on the main organizers and the leaders, that's what they're calling the leaders of the attacks. Does this suggest to you that Trump himself might be included?
In a word, yes. We are being told that Trump is likely to be one of the criminal referrals. One source said to me, front and center. And then we're talking about allies, people around him who were involved, as Sarah said, with the attacks. And I think it's important, Wolf, to remember that, look, while Congress has no power here, you would be the first to say this is up to DOJ, members of the committee have made it clear they're not trying to pressure DOJ, the Justice Department. They feel that these criminal referrals are a critical part of their work for history, for the record, that they must go on the record, that it would be notable if they didn't because of what they found in their evidence and testimony during the hearings.
We're also learning, Elliot, and this is also very, very significant potentially, that the U.S. Justice Department Special Counsel, Jack Smith, has subpoenaed local officials in both Michigan and Wisconsin, and reportedly Arizona as well, for any and all communications with former President Trump. What does that say to you?
That is hugely significant for the former president. Look, when you're investigating someone, Wolf, what do? You try to talk to that person. If you can't talk to that person, you talk to and bring in subpoenas for individuals who interacted with them. So, number one, it's a suggestion that the president himself, you know, as Jamie's reported, the president himself is probably under investigation here, and we know that. And number two, others around him, senior White House staff, campaign aides, lawyers, also might be pulled into this. Now, we certainly know of investigations in all of those states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and so on. And this is, you know, the federal authorities are looking into that as well. And so it is a very, very big deal. Even just the transmission of those subpoenas is itself significant.
And more bad legal news for Trump himself. Audie, it's clear that the new special counsel, Jack Smith, he's moving very, very quickly, right?
Well, that's his reputation, first of all, and maybe the word isn't quickly, but decisively. And that's something that when it comes to special counsels, I think a lot of people are hungry for, especially after what happened with the Mueller investigation. There's this sense that there's been so much dialogue, evidence presented to the public, that someone needs to make a decision that will lead to some form of accountability. We don't know what form that will take, but I think instead of thinking of it as this is happening fast, think of it more as this is the culmination of many, many months of investigation, and someone is now making decisions.
You know, all of this, Mark, is happening as the Congress today honored the actual police officers who defended and risked their own lives defending the U.S. Capitol back on January 6th. In a remarkable statement, the family of fallen officer Brian Sicknick refusing to shake hands with Republican leaders Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, among others. The family saying the two have shown too much fealty to Trump. What do you make of that?
You know, there's a couple things. One is this is a moment in time. It's a picture that is if you are Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell, you've got to be thinking inwardly, like, how disgraced you feel, because this is happening in front of everybody. But let's put this all in context right now. 21 House Republicans voted against giving these police officers the Congressional Medal. One of them, Louis Gohmert, went down to Miami earlier this year and met with one of the defendants who was serving 60 days for her involvement in the January 6th hearing. When she walked out, he handed her an American flag that was flown over the United States Capitol. Put it into context, you can understand why these folks are extremely upset.
Yeah, they wouldn't even shake hands with these Republican leaders in the Congress. All right, guys, everybody stand by. There's more important news we're following right now. Up next, he's been notably silent on the former president's call for actually terminating parts of the U.S. Constitution over his 2020 election defeat. So what Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is finally saying as of now, our special coverage continues right after this. Welcome back to our special coverage of election night in America continued. We're watching the developments right now in Georgia as voters go to the polls in this historic runoff election with so much at stake. But first, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell today weighing in for the first time on Donald Trump's call for the, quote, termination of the United States Constitution.
Anyone seeking the presidency who thinks that the Constitution could somehow be suspended or not followed, it seems to me would have a very hard time being sworn in as President of the United States.
CNN's chief congressional correspondent Manu Raju is joining us now from Capitol Hill. Manu, McConnell used similar language when he criticized Trump for a meeting with a white nationalist at Mar-a-Lago not that long ago, but he's yet to say Trump should actually be disqualified as serving as president again.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, just last week, Mitch McConnell did the same thing. He began his weekly press conference criticizing Donald Trump, saying in the aftermath of that last meeting that Donald Trump had at Mar-a-Lago with white supremacists and anti-Semites that, quote, he's highly unlikely to ever be elected president of the United States. Last week, I asked him whether or not he could still support Donald Trump if Trump became the Republican nominee in 2024. This week, I asked him again in the aftermath of his criticism of Donald Trump's post that the Constitution should be terminated, whether he would still support Donald Trump if Trump were the nominee, and McConnell again sidestepped. This is the second straight week you've come out to begin your press conference criticizing Donald Trump. Can you say categorically that you would not support him if he were the Republican nominee?
What I'm saying is it would be pretty hard to be sworn in to the presidency if you're not willing to uphold the Constitution. That's what I said, and I just said it again.
But Mitch McConnell is very deliberate about the words he chooses. In fact, he rarely mentions Donald Trump. In fact, rarely addresses any number of Trump controversies. He's been done with the relationship with the former president in the aftermath of January 6th. Even though he voted to acquit Donald Trump in his impeachment trial, he accused Trump of being responsible, morally and practically responsible for the events of January 6th. And Trump, of course, has called for McConnell's ouster time and again. But Wolf, this, taken with his anti-Semitic dinner and as well as Donald Trump pushing Senate candidates who have faltered, have led to a serious break with Republicans on Capitol Hill. And if Herschel Walker loses tonight in Georgia, undoubtedly you'll hear more criticism from Capitol Hill directed towards the former president if that were to come to pass. Wolf.
All right, Manu, thank you. And joining me now, Bakari Sellers, former Democratic member of the South Carolina House of Representatives, along with David Urban, longtime Republican strategist and former senior advisor to the Trump campaign. Karen Finney also here, former senior spokesperson for Hillary for America, also part of the 2021 special election polling team for Raphael Warnock, and Jonah Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Dispatch. So, Jonah, you hear Senator McConnell. Anyone seeking the presidency who thinks the Constitution can somehow be suspended or not followed, it seems to me, would have a very hard time being sworn in as president of the United States. And then when asked, does that mean you don't support Trump, repeats it, basically. Okay, well, so how do you square that circle? Why is this so hard?
So look, I have a great deal of sympathy for Mitch McConnell, maybe not for the Republican Party in general, but this is the problem that you get when you have when you're trying to extricate yourself from Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell cannot say he would not support him, because politically that would make the issue a big fight between Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. And his whole strategy, much like Ron DeSantis' strategy and Glenn Youngkin's strategy, is to not give the big baby the bottle, not create a narrative of this big feud, but instead try to make it seem like he's old news and move on. It is not a profile in courage, but it may be the smartest politics.
All right, now, Bakari, it's interesting because you just mentioned Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin did come out, governor of Virginia, and say, I completely disagree with his comments. So at least he made it personal to both himself and to Trump.
Where is the bar? In hell? I mean, the bar is the lowest bar ever. I mean, the fact is this. Republicans, for a very long period of time, created this monster because they were afraid to take him on full frontally. All of this, and I get the politics of the Capitol, and I think that Mitch McConnell's politics of trying to manage a caucus is probably different from those individuals who may be trying to protect democracy or be president of the United States. You have to have some courage and some fortitude. That's what the American people are looking for. They're looking for somebody who's going to stand up. If you won't stand up to Donald Trump, how will you stand up to the president of China? How will you stand up to any of our foes around the world? And the most, I guess, for those watching, I think the thing that I can say that is disenchanting the most about these Republicans is when you have someone like Donald Trump talk about Mitch McConnell's wife or Ted Cruz's wife, and they won't even fight back. Then you know that those individuals are either beaten by Trump or don't have the fortitude or courage to be a leader, because if that was me, it'd be some furniture moving.
So David, okay, but what's interesting is what McConnell did, right, was try to say, I'm for the Constitution, okay, which is this line that everyone's trying to walk.
It's technically impossible for Trump to be sworn in on a document he refuses to defend.
That he's terminated, okay, so I get it. You know, there's a technicality here. Okay, but he's not alone on that. Okay, here's just a few more examples.
Obviously, I'm a strong supporter of the Constitution.
I think everyone that serves in public office, everyone that aspires to serve or to serve again, should make it clear that we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Okay,
so listen, let's make it clear.
Hold on.
Let's make it clear. I was going to say, let's make it clear. I support the Constitution. There's no daylight between me and the Constitution. Look, Jonah has it correct, right? It may not be a profile of courage, but you don't necessarily want to fight with Donald Trump on every tweet. Are we back to that again? I think Republicans want to try to put some space between the former president and themselves, and every tweet, every dinner, every meal, every snack, every thought that he has. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck in this downward spiral to 24, and independent voters are going to say, hey, guess what? We were right in the midterms. We are trying to separate ourselves from the Republican Party. They're going to run even further away from the Republican Party. So while it may not be, again, as Jonah characterized, a profile of courage, it may be the best strategy for Republicans at this
Karen,
point.
those are the top two Republicans in the House, though. I mean, you may agree with them that this is the strategy. Is it the right one?
It is for them now. I mean, now that the American people have actually shown backbone, I mean, you know, they've had more backbone than the Republican leadership, because they're the ones who went out and voted and said, we're done with this. We don't want this. So in terms of profiles and courage, it's not a lot of courage to come out and now it's cool and hip to criticize, you know, Donald Trump, when the American people have already made it okay for you to do that. Because let's remember, in terms of the politics, there is also 1/3 of the Republican Party that believes Donald Trump pretty much no matter what he says. And for the last 4 years, many of the Republicans are also afraid of those voters because they need those voters. That's part of the reason they don't want to get into a back and forth publicly.
Yeah, and the person who needs those voters is Herschel Walker.
Yeah, tonight he's on the ballot. Yeah. He's over there showing up as we speak. Come on out, people.
All right, thank you very much, and stay with me. More to come with our special coverage as election night in America continues. Christian evangelical leader Ralph Reed, a top supporter for Herschel Walker's campaign, will join us next. Welcome back to our special coverage. Election night in America continued. For Georgia voters headed to the polls right now to decide the last uncalled Senate race in the country. Democrat Raphael Warnock versus Republican Herschel Walker. And whoever wins this race will make history, becoming the first black person from the state of Georgia to win a full term in the U.S. Senate. I want to go now to Ralph Reed. He is the founder and chair of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. He's a Herschel Walker supporter and also the former chair of the Georgia Republican Party. So you have a horse in this race, and you know the state as well as anyone can know it. Ralph, and I really appreciate your time. I'm glad to speak with you. So back on November 8th, of course, you know, no one got over 50%. So we're at this runoff. Walker trailed Warnock on that date, right? He trailed him by about 0.9 of a percentage point. You know the Georgia electorate. Why do you believe that Walker can do better this time, that he can pull this out on Election Day?
Well, the reason's really pretty simple. They overperformed in the early vote, and Herschel is likely to overperform today. And that's not just, hope. That's based on hard data. There's about 200,000 more likely Republican voters than Democrats that had not yet voted after the early vote. And there's about, roughly 330,000 more very high propensity, almost guaranteed Republican voters, base voters. These are what, consultants refer to as 4x4s. They voted in 4 out of the last 4 elections. So there's about a 330,000 vote advantage there for the Republicans. So, look, Aaron, I would have preferred when I was party chairman here, and when you look at the campaigns that are run in Florida by the party there, you'd much rather have a closer gap in the early vote. But the data's there, the math is there, but it's all going to boil down to turnout. If the Republican voters turn out today on the level that they're capable of, and preliminarily, based on what the Secretary of State is projecting, they are today, this is going to be a nail-biter. I mean, it could be a very late night.
Right. And all right, so we're going to see what happens. Look, the reality of it is, though, and what you're saying may indeed, of course, come to pass. But the reality of it is we're in this situation because a lot of Republicans who voted for Brian Kemp, Republican at the top of the ticket, did not choose to vote for Herschel Walker a month ago, right? If they had all done that, he would have won. But they didn't. So he has to turn this around. And some Republicans in your state come forward to say Walker was just the wrong candidate for the GOP in Georgia and that it's the candidate that's the problem. One of them is the current Republican lieutenant governor of the state, Jeff Duncan. And I asked him about Herschel Walker the other day. Here's what he told me.
Herschel Walker is going to go down as probably the worst Republican candidate in the history of politics, right? It's just no way to run away from that.
Okay. What do you say, Ralph? I mean, could a different Republican candidate have just run away with this 4 weeks ago?
I mean, candidly, nothing against Jeff, who I've known for a long time. That's just absurd. I mean, you're comparing an incumbent Republican governor against a challenger to an incumbent U.S. senator who is outspending him 3 or 4 to 1. It's just apples and oranges. And Herschel came up 37,000 votes short on November 8th compared to Kelly Loeffler losing to Warnock by, I think, roughly, give or take, 100,000 votes 2 years ago. So how's Herschel the worst candidate ever? I mean, it's just an absurd thing to say. And I would just simply say that if Herschel wins tonight, and I think he's more than capable of doing it, all of this conventional wisdom will be shattered. But regardless, I can tell you this. I've been involved in every statewide campaign in the state of Georgia for 44 years. And I can tell you, I have never seen a candidate take the hits he has taken and not only survive, but thrive. He got resilient. He only got stronger. He became a better candidate. And I think he has the possibility to really surprise a lot of people. I think there's a very good chance he could win tonight.
Well, it certainly, as you point out, it would fly in the face of conventional wisdom. You're sure right about that, and we'll see what happens. I want to ask you about one other thing, Ralph, since we're together, because you were a very vocal supporter and defender of President Trump. You wrote a book making the argument for evangelical support for Trump in spite of the things that he had done. Okay, so now in the past few days, he has called for the termination, that's his word, of the Constitution in order to overturn the 2020 election. He, of course, has already announced his candidacy for 2024. Could you support a candidate who has called for the termination of the Constitution?
Well, I certainly appreciate the question. It's a fair question, but I'm not going to talk about 2024 at all until this runoff is over. And I've said that publicly. I'm not going to speculate about 2024. I know it's your job to ask the question, and believe me, we get it everywhere we go. Everybody wants to talk about 2024. We've got roughly 2.5 hours left before the polls close. I've still got people making phone calls and canvassing voters. We're still flushing the vote here. I'll focus on 2024 after this runoff is over.
So in 2.5 hours, you'll be willing to answer it?
I didn't say that. I said I'm not going to comment on it until after this election is over.
Okay.
But I will say this, without addressing 2024. Donald Trump was the most pro-life, pro-religious freedom, pro-family, and pro-Israel president in my lifetime. He's a friend of mine. And I think if he goes out there and he runs, he'll get a fair hearing from evangelical and faith-based voters. I'm not predicting the outcome of the nomination. I think it'll be very contentious, but I think he'll get a very fair hearing given the record that he had as president.
So just to make sure, though, I'm saying this, you're saying that his pro-life stance may be more important to you than his lack of support for the Constitution, his call for terminating it.
Well, I think that's what campaigns are about. I mean, you know, there'll presumably be a crowded and contentious primary, and there'll be others making an alternative case. But when you've got the kind of record that he had on life, on court appointments, on religious freedom, on support for Israel, all I'm saying is he's been a very good friend to the faith community and on those issues, so he's going to get a fair hearing.
All right, Ralph Reed, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.
Sure, Aaron. Good to be with you.
All right. And coming up, more of our special coverage as election night in America continues. We're going to break down which candidate could be winning the battle to get out the vote. Our political director, David Chalian, will join us next. We are counting down to the polls closing in what is the last battle of the 2022 midterms, Georgia's high-stakes Senate runoff election. Good afternoon to all. I'm Erin Burnett. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world.
And I'm Wolf Blitzer. This is CNN's special coverage of Election Night in America continued. The stakes could not be higher tonight. The results will determine if Democrats win an outright majority in the U.S. Senate.
That's right, Wolf. And as we speak, Georgians are still lining up to cast their vote for either Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock or his Republican challenger Herschel Walker. Look, this is a race that has already shattered records. Georgia's elections chief, Gabe Sterling, who I'm going to be speaking with in just a moment, has told us that more than 1.8 million Georgians voted earlier by mail, almost 1.9 million. You can see the numbers here. That's incredible numbers, record-breaking numbers for a midterm runoff. And both parties have poured an incredible amount of money and resources into this race, because while Democrats will still control the Senate next year, regardless of today's outcome, what a Warnock win does is give Democrats more leverage, right? All of a sudden, Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, that whole rubric changes. And it includes then that they can get nominees confirmed faster. It would also give the party a one-seat advantage in the congressional committees that are now evenly split, right? So there are real, tangible things that would happen here for Democrats. And Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema can't single-handedly control their party's agenda anymore if Warnock prevails. We are watching breaking news also out of New York this hour. Trump's companies found guilty on all counts by a Manhattan jury, including tax fraud, falsifying business records, and conspiracy. The attorney for Trump org just responding, and we're going to have more on that in a moment. First, though, teams covering both the campaigns in Georgia tonight. Eva McKend is with Warnock. Jeff Zeleny is with Walker. I want to start with you, Eva. So what has the mood been like here as we're in these final minutes here before the polls close?
Well, Aaron, I will have to say, it seems to me from my reporting on the ground that Senator Warnock, we actually just saw him walk through here in the ballroom area just a few minutes ago, and the campaign just seems to have a lot more swagger and enthusiasm going into this runoff than I witnessed 4 weeks ago, rather. That was also evident among student organizers this week working with the campaign. They indicated to me that they were more confident now. Still, Senator Warnock expressing cautious optimism again this morning to his supporters. Cautioning them, saying, listen, Herschel Walker still has a real path to victory here, and that Republican voters tend to come out on Election Day. So, Aaron, that is still why at this late hour, with just 2 hours until the polls close, Democratic-aligned organizers are still knocking doors tonight.
Oh, every vote counts, and it is incredible, shattering so many records. I want to go now to Gabe Sterling. He is the Chief Operating Officer in the Georgia Secretary of State's office. So, Gabe, here we are. You shattered the record for the early vote. What are you seeing today on Election Day?
Well, it feels like deja vu all over again. We're seeing essentially no lines in the state. Our average wait time has gone down to about 1 minute. The lines we are seeing are few and far between, but in some of the areas it didn't take as much advantage of the early voting opportunities that were out there. So Interestingly, the turnout looks like it's sort of eking up a little above what some people on the outside thought was going to happen. We were thinking 1.1 maybe at the beginning of the day. It's getting closer to a 1.3, 1.35 million votes, which is, again, another historic turnout for a runoff election and midterm.
So can you put 1.3, 1.35 million in context? On election day 4 weeks ago, it was 1.5, right? So you're close there. Do you think you could match that?
It was actually 1.4 million, and
okay.
It's up to the voters. There's a couple hours left to vote. We have some data directly from counties. We don't have from all the counties, so we're making some educated guesses here. But it's a little higher than I think most people kind of anticipated. We had some rain here in the early part of the day that we thought was going to be here all day, which kind of cleared out. It was mainly in the eastern part of the state through most of the day. But again, we're seeing record turnout in the counties. I just can't say enough about what a great job they're doing processing these people through. And like I said, we're at an average wait time of 1 minute. So the one thing I will say, well, I've got these folks, is if you're in Georgia and you hadn't voted yet, you still have time, and there is no line likely where you live. So please get out and vote and make your voice heard. You don't want to be one of those people on the sidelines what could really be a close race.
So are you surprised by the fact that it sounds like what you're saying is you could have more enthusiasm, more turnout today, between today and the early vote of the past week, than you did for the actual midterm itself when you had Secretary of State, Governor, Congress, and Senate on the line?
I doubt we'll break that number, but we're looking at something close to, if we get to the high end of what we're talking about today, getting to a 3.4 million when we had just under 4 million before, which is a gigantic turnout for a runoff election. You got to understand, usually you fall down to like 40%, maybe 50% of what you had in the first round.
Yeah.
We are going to be well above that by the end when all is said and done.
And so Ralph Reed was on, as you know, he's obviously been a supporter of Warnock's and the Georgia Republican Party. He was saying he thinks that this could go into tomorrow morning before a call is being able to be made. You sort of, you looked like you smiled a bit there. But Gabe, do you think you'll be able to call this race tonight?
Aaron, it is 100% up to the voters. I have not a freaking clue within that booth. So we don't have any idea, and that's why we count the votes. That's why we run the races. We don't just pick these things based on polls. And every vote, I think, is going to matter. And the higher this turnout goes, the more unknown it's going to become.
All right. Well, Gabe Sterling, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm sorry there, Wolf, I misspoke. Of course, Ralph Reed supports Walker and not Warnock. Wolf.
Yeah, good point. John King is with me over here, over at the Magic Wall. What jumps out to you, John, from what we just heard?
Well, the interesting part from what Mr. Sterling just said is that he believes turnout's going to be a little higher than even he anticipated, right? In a runoff election, it tends to drop quite a bit. He says it's going to drop, but not as much. So then here's the big question. Who most learned the lesson of 4 weeks ago and then of early voting? We're going to fill this in starting at 7 o'clock, and Georgia does a great job. We'll get some votes early on, then we'll see how late and how long the count goes. But let's go back 4 weeks ago, Wolf, just to show the point I'm trying to make. You see the vote, you see the turnout. This is the general election. This is a month ago, so it's not going to match those numbers. The question is how far down? And so if it's higher than anticipated, what is happening? Does the Walker campaign, with Brian Kemp's help, remember, the popular Republican governor, Herschel Walker gets 49% 4 weeks ago. Governor Kemp gets 53% and change. He has given his turnout operation over to the Walker campaign, which was not the case 4 weeks ago. Is that why? Is Brian Kemp helping Herschel Walker turn out votes? If so, that could make a difference. Or is the Warnock campaign realizing you had a shorter early voting window? They thought they were very successful in that early voting window, but it closed on Friday. So are they doing a good job running through their list? Who didn't show up by Friday in getting their voters to turn out today on Election Day? That's the mystery of the election. Or both campaigns, it could be, both campaigns are doing a good job. And then we're counting. It's a very competitive state. We're going to watch it play.
Let's just remind our viewers the reason there's a runoff election is because neither of these two candidates got more than 50% of the vote.
And it shows you, look, Georgia now, what do we want to call Georgia? Is it still a red state that's open to being blue? Is it a purple state that's competitive? That's the big question. And that's the question that's going to be, this election will help settle. It won't fully settle. But here's why, if you look at this. So just 4 weeks ago, Warnock's in the runoff. He's the leading candidate, but just by 37,675 votes. On that very same day, the Republican governor wins in a landslide by nearly 300,000 votes. So a Republican governor, an incumbent, who you see all this blue around Atlanta suburbs. Yes, Brian Kemp lost the Atlanta suburbs, but look at the difference, right? He's getting, in Cobb County, he's getting 47% Brian Kemp, compared to Herschel Walker, who's getting only 40%. Margins matter where the people live, in the populous suburbs. So is this a race? What is Georgia? It is clearly a state that a mainstream Republican can win and win quite comfortably. But, Wolf, it is also, go back in time to 2020, in the presidential race, it's also a race that a Democrat can win. Joe Biden by only 11,000 votes, almost 12,000 votes. Remember, 12,000 votes call that in 2020. Go back to 2016. Donald Trump wins it in 2016. Let me get it in here by 211,000 votes and change. So what happened between 2016 and 2020? Well, Donald Trump became toxic in the suburbs. So a Donald Trump Republican has trouble in the suburbs, not just in Georgia, but everywhere. A Brian Kemp Republican can cut the margins in the suburbs and win quite comfortably. Who is Herschel Walker? How does Warnock perform? That's what we find out in just a couple hours.
We're going to continue our analysis here. John, thank you very, very much. We'll have much more of our special coverage of the Georgia runoff election. But first, there's breaking news we're following. CNN learning former President Trump and his allies could be the subject of what are called criminal referrals from the January 6th Select Committee. Also breaking right now, Trump's organization found guilty on multiple counts of criminal tax fraud. The attorney for the Trump organization now responding. Plus, new reporting tonight about the conversations that are now taking place inside the Walker campaign, how they're feeling about their chances tonight. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our special coverage. Election night in America continued. Polls closing in less than 2 hours in Georgia in a truly historic Senate runoff election. But first, there's more on the breaking news we're following, this time from a Manhattan jury. The companies bearing Donald Trump's name committed tax fraud as part of a 15-year criminal scheme. That's so there's that. And now there's word of an appeal that's going on as well. CNN's Kara Scannell is joining us right now with details. Kara, what was Trump companies, what were they found guilty of, and what kind of penalties are they facing?
Yeah, well, so after 2 days of deliberations, this jury of 8 men and 4 women delivered this verdict of guilty on all counts. So this is 2 Trump entities, and they were charged with multiple counts for this 15-year scheme to avoid paying taxes. This was an off-the-books compensation scheme where employees received corporate apartments, car leases, and in the case of one top executive, private school tuition for his grandchildren. These counts included scheme to defraud, conspiracy, 3 counts of tax fraud, and multiple counts of falsifying business records. Now, the district attorney for Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, said that this verdict shows that there is one standard of justice in Manhattan, saying that everyone should be treated equally under the law. Now, the Trump organization said that they will appeal this verdict, and the judge set the sentencing for next month. Now, that for January, when they will be back in court. The company faces under the statute a maximum of $1.6 million in fines. And while there is no mechanism under New York law for a company indicted and found guilty of a felony to face any sort of dissolution or unwinding, a guilty verdict against the company can make it very difficult for them to do business. It can make it tougher for them to get financing. It can make it tougher for them to get contracts. So the full impact of this is still unknown, but the former president himself was not charged in this case, although prosecutors did say in court that they believe that he sanctioned some of this tax fraud. Wolf?
Very important developments indeed. All right, Kara, thank you very much. There's more breaking news we're following. And let's discuss right now with Mark Preston, CNN senior political analyst, Audie Cornish, CNN anchor and correspondent. Also with us, Nia Malika Henderson, our senior political analyst, and Jamie Gangel, CNN special correspondent. And Jamie, I understand you have some new reporting on the January 6th Select Committee and these criminal referrals that are about to go forward, presumably including criminal referrals against former President Trump and some of his closest allies.
Correct, Wolf. What the committee announced today, the chairman of the committee announced that they will make criminal referrals. We are told that Donald Trump is likely front and center and that there will be people around him. We don't know how many. We don't have names, but we were told, quote, it will be focused on the main organizers and leaders of the attacks. Let's just be clear for a minute. It is symbolic that Congress is doing it. They are not the prosecutors. The Department of Justice will then decide whether to indict and go forward. But the committee believes this is critical as a way of completing its work for the record, for history. And here's something we really haven't discussed about what they're going to be able to say to DOJ. We know the committee has really been ahead of the Justice Department. They have evidence, they have testimony that justice does not have yet. So I think what we're likely to see is when they do these criminal referrals, I believe it will come in tandem with the final report. And those referrals, there'll be letters that the committee sends to Justice Department, may include very specific evidence and testimony that we don't know yet.
Because the committee will make public the transcripts of all the interviews that they conducted.
The transcripts, the notes, the evidence. So it's important as a symbol that they're doing it, but it's also important what they're going to be handing over to the Justice Department.
Between these potential criminal referrals, Nia, and the verdict, the guilty verdict in New York against the Trump organization right now, it's really a bad time for Trump.
That's right. It's a bad time for him. And obviously, a lot of this was self-inflicted. Not only did we have these decisions, this referral as well, he met with some anti-Semites recently after he announced that he was going to run again for president. He has really proven to be a drag on the Republican Party. We saw what happened in the midterm so far. We'll see what happens tonight, whether his chosen candidate is able to pull it out. But this is also why you see Republicans saying that somehow they think that he won't be able to make it to become the GOP nominee in 2024. Many of them aren't saying whether or not they would back him, but they're saying that somehow the weight of these investigations, the weight of the scrutiny, the weight of his poor decisions are going to somehow lead to his implosion. That is their hope. That is their prayer. It isn't necessary that they're going to do anything to stand in his way, but they're certainly going to stand back and watch all of this happen and hope that it weighs him down.
It didn't help that he also posted that he might like the Constitution or parts of the Constitution terminated.
His word terminated, very important. Mark, do you think all these controversies that the former president is going through right now actually matter to voters who are showing up, for example, in Georgia today?
Look, I think the controversy that follows Donald Trump around, had he gone into Georgia, it would have put Herschel Walker more on the defensive than he already has been. I mean, this is a campaign right now that has been shelled like regularly every day and has been able to keep coming back. Had Donald Trump come in, I think that would have been a problem. Now, what he did do is he did do a teletown hall that was directed strictly at MAGA voters, strictly at the Make America Great Again voters, the folks who think that Donald Trump should be president again. So I think that the Walker campaign is very happy that Donald Trump stayed in Florida.
I'm sure I suspect you're absolutely right. Artie, Georgia's Republican Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, he said that Herschel Walker, and I'm quoting him now, will, quote, probably go down as one of the worst candidates in our party's history. That's a direct quote. What does that say? That some in the GOP have already turned on Herschel Walker even before the polls in Georgia have closed?
I mean, there's always been a sort of never Trumper kind of constituency, but this person in particular says he's the proverbial skunk in the garden and has always been speaking out against Trump. The reason why it's significant is because this is a state where Kemp got all of those votes, right, that Walker didn't. So there is a gap there. So in a way, this voice represents a particular kind of voter, especially in the suburbs. That's what we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. And those suburbs are not just white. They've seen big demographic changes. You've heard a lot from Ralph Reed earlier in the night. He's someone who has tried to diversify his coalition. This is going to be an issue for Republicans going forward in this state in particular.
And it's worth noting, too, that, you know, going into Election Day, Democrats clearly had the advantage with the early vote. I will tell you, and I've heard the same thing, Jamie has heard the same thing just in the past couple hours from the Walker campaign, that once that the day of voting eclipsed 1 million, upwards 1.4, 1.5 million, the odds of them winning are getting greater. Now, it's still longer odds, but they're in a much better position as we sit here right now than yesterday, as they were predicting that
it's a coin toss. It is.
Voting.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens in the next few hours, guys. Thank you very much. Don't go too far away. Up next, Martin Luther King III standing by live to join us. Also, we're getting new reporting tonight from inside the Walker campaign and how they see the closing hours of this race. Stay with us.
And we are back with our special coverage of Election Night in America. Especially heavy runoff voting tonight as Georgians decide between Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is at Walker's headquarters for us right now. So, Jeff, in the closing days of the campaign, Herschel Walker really made an effort to tie Warnock to President Biden. From the voters you've been speaking to, was that message effective at all?
Aaron, it absolutely was, at least among Republican voters. That was really a central message that Herschel Walker was trying to deliver. Even though the control of the Senate was not at play, as Republicans certainly had hoped it would be at the time of this runoff, it certainly still provides an opportunity for Republicans to effectively control half of the committees in the Senate, to slow down nominations for the White House, and to make things more difficult for the president. So that certainly has been a big motivating factor for Republicans. And as I'm speaking to advisors to the Warnock campaign, they are heartened by these high turnout numbers. As the Secretary of State's office was just telling you a few moments ago, this turnout might hit 1.3 or 1.4 million election day turnout alone. And the Walker campaign certainly likes to hear that, and certainly that was a message because Republicans are here in Georgia trying to send a message to the White House and the president. Of course, there are many Democratic votes in this election day turnout as well, so we'll have to see how this shakes out in the final 90 minutes or so of voting. But certainly, Joe Biden was front and center in this race, even though he never traveled to Georgia during this campaign because the Warnock campaign asked him not to. They said he was simply too toxic and could turn off some of those voters in the middle. So certainly the former president, Donald Trump, and the current president, Joe Biden, have been weighing heavy on this race, even though neither of them have been here for weeks and months, Aaron.
Amazing. Neither of them welcome, but it looks like a much stronger turnout than anyone had even anticipated. Jeff Zeleny, thanks very much.
Right.
Wolf, and it really amazing to watch this turnout here. 90 minutes left, and we're still seeing these numbers go up, obviously.
Yeah, we'll see what happens when the actual votes start being counted. Aaron, thank you very much. Raphael Warnock is pastor of the church that my next guest certainly has a lifelong connection to, Dr. King's Ebenezer Baptist Church. Martin Luther King III is joining us right now. He's a Warnock supporter. Martin, thank you, as usual, for joining us. With less than 2 hours to go until the polls close, what are you seeing in terms of turnout and voter enthusiasm today?
Well, what I've seen throughout the whole process is voters are engaged, voters are excited, voters are voting. My dad used to say, a voteless people is a powerless people. And one of the most important steps that we must take is that short step to the ballot box. And I hope that we will see after this evening, based on numbers of the Secretary of State's office, that this has been one of the highest turnouts ever for an election of this type.
Yeah, very significant indeed. This race was incredibly tight in November's general election, as you know. This time around, Herschel Walker has the full backing of the popular Governor Brian Kemp. How close do you expect this runoff will actually turn out to be?
Well, I don't know that any of us can predict what that may be. The hope is that the people of Georgia want to elect a person who looks forward. I'm not saying that Herschel Walker looks backward. I'm just saying that, Herschel Walker has demonstrated that he is not the kind of candidate that should represent the state of Georgia. And so I think the voters will resoundingly say that. I think there's a potential for a decent victory, if not a significant victory. That would be my hope, a significant victory, because that would send a message to our state and to our nation.
We will find out sooner rather than later. Was it the right call, Martin, for President Biden not to appear in Georgia for Senator Warnock?
Well, I think that it was the decision of the president and Senator Warnock's campaign. And I think that Senator Warnock certainly brought in President Obama. President Obama came in, did an outstanding job, as always. Many people came from around the country. Pastors have come from around the nation, as well as people in every county organizing to make sure that the voters come out. And I expect and hope for a great victory this evening for Senator Warnock and for the state of Georgia and for our nation.
Yeah, we shall see soon enough, Martin Luther King III. It's always good to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
And our special coverage of Election Night in America continues in just a moment. Coming up, we're going to examine a huge factor in a lot of these midterm races, one that could benefit Senator Raphael Warnock tonight. Our senior data reporter, Harry Yenton, is standing by. He'll join us next to explain.
Welcome back to our CNN special election coverage. Election night in America continued. Well, we are just about 90 minutes, just under, when polls will close in the state of Georgia, where the incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock is in this historic runoff race against the former NFL and University of Georgia star player Herschel Walker. And there's one trend that our Harry Yenton has been watching during this midterm election, which actually comes into focus tonight. And that is one the Warnock campaign hopes will continue this evening. And Harry Yenton, our senior data reporter, is here to explain. So, Harry, we're talking about incumbents.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
So far this election cycle, the number of incumbents who have lost has been zero. Zero incumbents have lost. I think there's all
in the Senate.
In the Senate. Zero incumbents in the Senate have lost. That has never happened in the last century. I know there's all this talk about how people don't like voting for incumbents. People hate what's going on in Washington, D.C. But the fact is, zero incumbents have lost.
They want new blood. They want people who aren't on the inside. I don't want to use the word swamp because it's loaded, but you hear that from both political parties. And yet, okay, so in the Senate, all the incumbents win. But it's not just the Senate.
Correct. It's not just the Senate. So look at the gubernatorial races this year. We had somewhere near 30 incumbents running. How many of them lost? Just one. Just one. And I went back and looked at all the gubernatorial years since 1948 in which at least 10 incumbents were running. One is the fewest number of gubernatorial incumbents who lost since 1948. So you're looking at both the Senate, where you've had no incumbents lost so far, and the gubernatorial race is just one out in Nevada that lost.
Okay, right, in Nevada, obviously, and that one was as close as it can get.
Correct.
Okay, so, but why? Why in this environment, right, where the narrative is, let's switch it up? Do you think that incumbents are doing so much better than any historical precedent?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Senate races, right, you look at those Senate challengers, pretty much all of them had net negative favorability ratings in all the key states. So I think it was poor candidate selection. You also look at if you look at the Senate, right, and you say, okay, where were all the races? And it turns out that there was just one incumbent that represented a state that voted the opposite way in the 2020 presidential election. So it was a small playing field. And third, it ended up being a pretty neutral year, right? If you tally up all the gubernatorial votes and all the Senate votes nationwide, it was basically an even split between Democrats and Republicans. So there really wasn't much of a ground for basically challengers to pick up seats, especially given how tiny the playing field really was.
It is amazing, though, to actually look at the data and see that it's not what you'd expect.
You wouldn't have
it was
expected.
loud and clear.
Yeah.
All right, Harry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next, Democratic Senator Cory Booker will join us to discuss what it would mean for his party to have an outright majority of Senate seats, 51. That's what will happen if Senator Raphael Warnock wins tonight. Welcome back to CNN special coverage. Election night in America continued. The polls are closing. You're getting here. It's 5:44 Eastern, so about an hour and 15 minutes. The last Senate race will soon be decided, and we will finally know how many seats each party control. So our team of experts with me, these final thoughts in these final minutes, Bakari, David, Karen, and Jonah. Karen, you know Georgia well. I mean, you were a senior advisor for Stacey Abrams in 2018. You were part of the polling team for the special election in 2021. So what are you focused on tonight as we see these turnout numbers come in way stronger than people thought?
They're really important. Look, there's a couple of things. Number one, Warnock is counting on the fact that among his voters, he's very popular. So the level of intensity matters. Those are folks you can go back to and get them to turn out. On the other side, Walker doesn't have the same level of intensity, right? Additionally, a couple of things. Reverend Warnock's story is also something that we found in 2021 and continues. Really motivates and is mobilizing to voters. Someone who looks like me, someone who understands, what it is to work your way up, to be at the table, making those critical decisions that will affect our lives. And the other thing, I think, for the Warnock campaign that's critical that I'm looking for, tonight, is are we going to hit our numbers in some of those key places where you know, Warnock and Walker were close with regard to Republican independents, where we can hopefully increase turnout, particularly in areas where we may have African-American voters who didn't turn out the first time, who'd say, you know what, I do want to have a say in who's going to represent me in Congress.
So you're going to turn out of people who didn't turn out before, didn't turn out a few weeks ago.
Correct.
How do you see it, Jonah?
Yeah, sort of in a similar vein. I know the cliche to always talk about it comes down to turnout, but it's...
But it does.
And of course it does, because it's voting.
We have nothing to say.
It's like people in Hollywood saying it all comes down to who buys movie tickets. Of course it does, right? That said, I'm kind of more interested in who doesn't turn out, in the sense that in 2020, Republicans lost 2 utterly winnable seats because Donald Trump largely told a bunch of MAGA voters it's not worth the effort, the system's rigged. In 2022, we're in this situation because in 2020, and then also in 2020, moderate voters wouldn't turn out for Trump. The question now is, who voted for Kemp but left Walker blank, or didn't vote for Walker but voted for Warnock, but now that it's a tighter issue, who's just sort of like, I don't want to do this? Because I think the Republicans are in a very much maybe not on camera, but behind the scenes on a lessons learned, how have we gotten ourselves into this mess mode. So it'll be interesting to see who's turned off from voting in this time around.
I mean, that is what it comes down to, David. How many people, I mean, it comes down to a lot of things, but how many people could Walker get, right, who went and voted for Kemp on Election Day, right, and did not vote for Walker? I don't know what they did.
200,000 plus, we know, right, about that.
They just could not do it.
You know, interesting, we were talking about this in the break there. You know, Trump won Georgia by 211,000 votes in 2016. He actually won 200,000 votes. And now we're in a situation where we're eking out trying to win by 10,000 votes, right? So where did those 200,000 people go? They voted for Kemp. They voted for Trump in 2016. And what happened to those Republicans? What did we do as a party to push them away, right? I mean, I think I have an idea what we did, but, you know, a lot of tweeting. And how do we get them back? How do we get those folks back in this election in 24 and moving forward? What do we have to do to convince those suburban voters and voters in the exurbs to come back to our party?
Right, even if you do eke it out, and we'll see.
Right.
But I mean, okay, so that point, Bakari, is what Gabe Sterling was just saying. I mean, you're looking at 1.3, 1.4 million people coming out today. That's more than people thought. Is that going to be check to enthusiasm for Warnock, or is that going to be what enables Walker to eke it out?
Well, that makes Democrats nervous because of the fact that, I mean, everyone knows that usually Democrats vote early, Republicans vote the day of. And so when you see that wave of enthusiasm, usually that bodes well for Republicans. We would be remiss if we didn't say, if you're still in line to vote, stay in line to vote. Make sure you turn out and vote.
Right, if you're in line, you get to vote.
Stay in line,
right,
please.
Right.
Everybody who's watching this, do so. But there are a couple other things. When I ran in 2014, and when people run statewide throughout the South, and it's somewhat like what Fetterman did, one of the things you want to do is not get demolished in those small rural counties. It's not how well you do in Chatham County or Savannah. It's not how well you do in Richmond, which is Augusta, or DeKalb and Fulton, although people look at those big numbers and want to see how much you win by. It's how well you do in those other areas, those majority white rural areas, because what you can't come out of there is lose, 90 to 10, 80 to 20. It's whether or not you can shrink that gap. That's right. And last but not least, something that hasn't been spoken about a lot in mainstream media is that there is a complete and utter disdain by black voters for Herschel Walker.
Yes.
And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we feel, and I don't speak for all black folk, but many black folk feel that Herschel Walker represents the worst elements of every prejudice and trope that individuals have. Right. Just from the inarticulate, the anti-intellectualism, the inability to be able to speak for himself.
Pro-werewolf.
Pro-werewolf. I know that whole thing.
Very sad.
And so it's a visceral type of anger, and I anticipate that will translate to the polls as well.
Just one quick thing.
This is a really important point with the African American community. Which black man do you want representing you on the national stage?
I was just going to say
that. Perfect follow-up here, David.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
I got nothing to add, right person for this. But what Bakari was saying about the small counties, right? How Fetterman, you don't want to lose it. You don't want to get blown out in the small counties. And so if you notice, that's where Herschel was. Herschel's been spending a lot of time in North Georgia, a lot of these small counties trying to pump up. So if his numbers, instead of winning by, if he wins by 70, that's something. He wins by 90. That could get him across the finish line, and that's what he's been doing. If he wins, that's why he's going to win tonight.
All right. Thank you all. And more ahead as election night in America continues. And the latest on the House January 6th committee's big decision to refer criminal charges now, potentially against the former president of the United States.
Welcome back to CNN's special coverage. Election night in America continued. Senate Democrats could have an outright majority if Senator Raphael Warnock wins. The Senate had been split 50-50 for President Biden's first 2 years. The current count is 54-49. A Warnock victory would give Democrats 51 seats and a clear majority. I'm joined now by Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. Senator Booker, thanks so much for joining us. We're just a little bit more than an hour away from the polls closing in Georgia. You've been there to campaign with Warnock. Is he going to win?
You know, I feel confident. The numbers we're seeing are really, really strong. Obviously, nothing's certain, but I have a lot of faith that the people of Georgia, looking at these two candidates, will see that there's one clear person who will best represent Georgia and, frankly, the best interests of the United States of America.
If Democrats have 51 seats in the next Senate, in the next term, does that mean that individual senators, for example, people like Senator Kyrsten Sinema, Senator Joe Manchin, will have a lot less power? How much more would you be able to get done, considering Republicans will control the House of Representatives?
Well, remember, one of the biggest things we've been able to do is to work to balance the courts out. Donald Trump was the first person ever to outsource his court selections to right-wing groups. And what we've been able to do is get a record number of judges on in the first 2 years of Joe Biden. But even that was slowed down by Republicans because we were a split Congress, a split Senate. And that meant that every judge that was in any way an equal vote had to get a special, something called a discharge petition. So everything was slowed down by being a 50-50 Senate. And so having him there is going to make us being able to push balanced judges onto the court. And even more than that, frankly, under a 50-50 Senate, Raphael Warnock was able to get extraordinary things done as a freshman senator, from capping insulin prices to $35 to expanding access to support for disadvantaged farmers in his state and around the country. So I think in a 51-seat Senate, he'll be all the more effective in getting good things done and across the line.
What does it say to you, Senator, that in the final stretch for Senator Warnock, President Biden stayed away from Georgia, did not come to the state, and actually campaign there physically?
I'm not sure what it says. The president's making his own choices as to his travels. The reality is, I think the Warnock team knows that this is going to be an election that's won from the grassroots up. Even when I was there, what they had me doing was speaking to volunteers, going to grassroots rallies. They've told me that this is a field operation, person to person, pulling folks to the polls, getting people out to vote. That's really what this is about for them. And I think that's their secret, ultimately, to what their victory is going to be about.
You've said in the past, Senator, that you would support a 2024 run for President Biden. Given where things stand now, do you still feel that way?
Oh, very strongly. I mean, if the president makes a decision to run, I don't think we can point to any president, maybe going back to LBJ, that has had as much of a successful 2 years. I mean, even today, if you look at the jobs report, we added another 250,000 jobs in the United States, the unemployment rate down to 3.7%. He's created more than 10 million jobs since he's been in. And this is during a major pandemic and a lot of other economic headwinds that are causing inflation all around the globe, in countries all around the globe. His bipartisan pieces of legislation, from gun safety bill to infrastructure to chips and science, have been extraordinary. And in the depth of the pandemic, he kept food on a lot of families' tables, with everything from stimulus checks to efforts to keep our small businesses and our venues open. He has been a successful president, dealt some of the worst hands of cards imaginable, including trying to clean up a lot of the mess that we saw from President Donald Trump that led all the way into the start of his time right after January 6th.
So what are your biggest concerns right now for Democrats looking forward, Senator?
Well, you know, I think my biggest concern is we've had a constructive bipartisan Congress. A lot of the things we've gotten done together. And so I'm really worried about the House of Representatives, and I'm listening to very closely what they say. But what they're talking about is not their ideas to deal with inflation or to help working families. I'm worried that their focus is much more attacking President Biden, going after his son, and doing crazy hearings that are not going to be productive and constructive to what Americans really need right now.
Senator Cory Booker, thanks as usual for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you all.
And to our viewers, thanks very much for joining us as well. Election night in America continues right now with Jake Tapper and Anderson Cooper. We'll be continuing our special coverage.
Live pictures of the state capitol in Atlanta, the center of political power in Georgia. Voters across the Peach State now in the final hours of casting their ballots in the last major election of the 2022 midterms. It is all up to Georgia now to decide the balance of power in the United States Senate. This as there is a major new development here in Washington. The January 6th Select Committee now set to make criminal referrals to the Justice Department. That could potentially include former President Donald Trump. Welcome to CNN's live coverage of Election Night in America. Continued. I'm Jake Tapper, and we're standing by for the first results in the Georgia Senate runoff. Polling places across the state will close at 7 p.m., just a few minutes from now. The incumbent Democrat, Senator and Pastor Raphael Warnock, is facing off against his Republican challenger, the former football star Herschel Walker. This heated runoff featuring strong early turnout, lots of campaign cash being spent, and continuing controversies plaguing Herschel Walker. Here's what's at stake. If Warnock is reelected, Democrats would win an outright majority of 51 U.S. Senate seats. That would strengthen their control of the Senate. President Biden and his party would have a edge, very slim one, but still an edge in the Senate as they try to push through their agenda and push back against the new Republican-controlled House of Representatives. That means also the Democrats would be less reliant on Vice President Harris casting tie-breaking Senate votes during a 50-50 face-off, and they would also be less vulnerable to the demands of individual Democratic senators such as West Virginia's Joe Manchin and Arizona's Kyrsten Sinema. Now, on the other hand, if Walker wins, the Senate would remain as it is now, evenly split 50-50, as it's been during the last 2 years. That would give a boost to Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and his party after Republicans failed to win control of the Senate and their hopes of a midterm sweep were dashed. This contest also is a new test of former President Trump's influence on the GOP, as Trump was just hit with new legal blows. His company found guilty on all 17 counts in a criminal tax fraud trial. Also tonight, the January 6th Select House Committee says that its members have decided to make criminal referrals to the Justice Department, though they have not yet revealed who will be targeted in those referrals. Covering all this tonight with me, Dana Bash, Abby Phillip, Manu Raju, and our entire election team. John King is over at the Magic Wall, tracking the Georgia votes county by county. David Chalian is at our battleground desk, comparing the early and election day votes. And Pamela Brown is at our voting desk, keeping tabs on any issues that come up as the ballots are processed and reported. We also have correspondents on the ground here in Washington and throughout Georgia covering the candidates. They're at key locations where votes are being cast and counted. First, let's go to Eva McCann. She's at the headquarters for Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock. And Eva, what are you hearing from the Warnock camp tonight?
Well, Jake, we've learned that Senator Warnock is going to be gearing up for election night right here in Atlanta. We actually saw him walk through headquarters a little bit to assess the space not too long ago. He spent the day really trying to combat voter fatigue, telling his supporters, look, you might be tired now, but just think about how tired you will be if Herschel Walker, his Republican rival, wins this evening and earns a 6-year term in the United States Senate. Senator Warnock, Herschel Walker outpaced Governor Kemp by about 200,000 votes. And so we have seen some momentum here from Democrats. But still, Warnock cautioning his supporters against getting too complacent here tonight, Jake.
That's right. And Jeff Zeleny is with the campaign of Republican Herschel Walker. And Jeff, tell us how things are there.
Well, Jake, for the Herschel Walker campaign, they are heartened by the turnout that they are seeing across the state of Georgia throughout the day today on Election Day. Yes, we have heard a lot and talked a lot about those early votes, about 1.9 million early and absentee ballots cast, but it's the votes on Election Day today that will determine this race. And the advisors to Herschel Walker are telling me that they believe the predictions of 1.3 or 1.4 million votes, that comes from the Secretary of State's office in terms of turnout, that offers them a path to victory. In fact, their optimism has increased as the day has gone along, because that is what they believe is a sign of strong Republican turnout showing out to polls across the state today. So not predicting victory, of course, but they do believe they are in this race because of the turnout. And Jake, there's still 1 more hour of voting left, and Republicans are still working the phones and trying to get more votes out in the final hour, Jake.
And John, that's really for Herschel Walker. What it's all dependent upon is how strong is the turnout today. There was early voting, which probably favored Raphael Warnock, the incumbent Democratic senator. But how strong was it today for Herschel Walker?
How strong was it today, and do we see in that evidence that Herschel Walker learned from his mistakes of 1 month ago? And if you go back to 1 month ago, the reason we're here tonight, Warnock led 37,000 votes, nearly 38,000 votes a month ago. Herschel Walker, though, right behind him, just right behind him, 49.4, 48.5, the Libertarian candidate, the spoiler, if you will, the reason we're in the runoff. Nobody got over 50%. Why do I say we will learn? Did Herschel Walker learn from his mistakes? Well, we were here a month ago when Governor Brian Kemp not only won, but won convincingly. That's a landslide in a
almost
competitive state like Georgia.
300,000, yeah.
Almost 300,000. So how did that happen, right? How did Herschel Walker come in second when Brian Kemp did that? Well, look, let's just come right up here into Cobb County. Brian Kemp losing, right? He's losing in this county. These are the Democratic-leaning suburbs around Atlanta, but he's getting 47% of the vote. What happened to Herschel Walker? 40%. Right? Move over to Fulton County. That's Atlanta and the suburbs right around it. Atlanta's down here. The suburbs up here. Walker's getting 25%. Governor Kemp getting 31% if you round up. Move over here, the second largest county in the state, Gwinnett. Used to be a Republican suburb, more and more Democratic now. The governor gets 44%. Herschel Walker getting only 39%. He underperformed the governor throughout the blue suburbs in Atlanta, and even in these more ex-urban counties to the north. Cherokee County here. You move over to Forsyth County here. So can Herschel Walker, you see he won this county. You say, why are you mentioning that county tonight? He won it. Well, he won it with 65%. The governor gets 72%. Margins matter. In places where your voters are, you need to run it up. See if Herschel Walker can do that here. In places where you're likely to lose, you got to cut into the margins. Herschel Walker, the governor did it quite well a month ago. Herschel Walker did not. So that's what you watch. Largely, most of the votes here, Atlanta and the suburbs around it, but you see this swath of red? That's the big question, Jake. Do Republican voters turn out in an election where they know it will not affect the balance of power in the Senate? It makes a big difference. 51 for the Democrat makes a big difference, but this is not what the Georgia runoff was 2 years ago. It is not for control of the Senate. So do Republicans stay home and say it doesn't matter, I have questions about Herschel Walker, or do they say this is a defining fight, I'm going to do it for him, I'm going to do it for Trump, I'm going to do it for Kemp? We're going to find out in about an hour.
Really interesting stuff. And Dan Bash, let me go to you with that very question. Do Republicans wish that the balance of power would have been actually determined by this vote? Would that perhaps have helped them get out the vote even more today?
Well, they definitely wish that this race would determine the balance of power, because it would mean that they had one more vote in the United States Senate, which they do not have. But, you know, John was talking about margins mattering when you're looking at the vote today. Margins matter in the United States Senate.
Yeah.
And even though this isn't for control, one more seat, people out there might go, huh? You know, sort of shrug their shoulders. One more seat makes a big difference in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways. I mean, not just in the new Congress, which we'll get to in a second, but also in the next election. What if there's another 50-50 Senate? That could also determine who's in control of the Senate. But in the new Congress, immediately after this, there's going to be a negotiation, a power-sharing agreement between the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer. In that power-sharing agreement, Republicans will have more say in a 50-50 Senate, particularly on the committee level. They could deny subpoenas that Democrats want to issue. They could bottle up nominations. They'll have more power. If the Democrats get another seat, they will essentially ignore Republicans on the committee level on these issues. But the most significant thing is on the issue of nominations, especially if there's a Supreme Court vacancy, which can occur at any time. Antonin Scalia died in 2016. They had Mitch McConnell decided not to move forward on a nomination. That changed American life for years and years to come. What happens if there's another debt? And then that gives them some margin for error. So if a Joe Manchin, for instance, who's up for re-election, decides he doesn't want to vote for a Supreme Court nominee, Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, has another vote to play with.
But what a difficult argument to make to voters. I mean, for those of us who follow this stuff very closely, it's incredibly significant and important, but it is hard to make these kinds of process arguments to voters, especially when you are a candidate like Herschel Walker is, who is not very skilled on the campaign trail at making these kinds of nuanced arguments. You're hearing them talk about a check on President Biden. Well, that was also the argument the last time around, and clearly it was not enough, just really underscoring how difficult it has been for them to settle on something that Herschel Walker can execute, but also that motivates Republicans who literally went out to the ballots, cast a ballot for someone else, and skipped Herschel Walker. Those are the people, at least 30,000 of them, they've got to get out tonight.
They do have to get them out. Talking to Republicans all day today, as I'm sure you both have as well, they have been really unsure if that's possible, given all of the challenges that we've talked about right now. And Jake, we're going to be watching that, particularly whether or not the Governor Kemp, and his endorsement and the fact that he put his resources in helped Walker.
Indeed. And we're getting closer to the first official votes in the Georgia Senate runoff. As we await results, we're going to talk with Georgia's top election official, the Secretary of State there, Brad Raffensperger. He's joining us live as Election Night in America continues. Stay right there. We'll be right back. All eyes on Georgia as voters there across the state decide the last outstanding Senate race of the 2022 midterms. We're back with our special coverage, counting down to the first results in the Georgia Senate runoff. Right now, let's go to Diane Gallagher. She's at a vote counting location in Fulton County. That's the most populous county in Georgia. It includes most of it, Atlanta. And Diane, what are you learning about the timetable for the processing and counting of these votes?
So there's the two kind of separate batches of votes, Jake. There's the, roughly across the state, 1.9 million early votes. Here in Fulton County, they started processing their early votes around 2 o'clock. They're going to upload all of those votes into their machines at 7 o'clock on the dot. We should start getting those results between 7 and 7:30 in Fulton County. But the election day votes, of course, will not start being brought in until after 7 o'clock when the polls close. So how do they get here? Well, look, designated people go and they pick those ballots up from each precinct. They take the secure ballots, and look, they're not allowed to use their personal cars for security purposes, both for the worker and the ballots. They can even ask for security to accompany them if they want to. They then drive those to this location here, where they then go into a card delivery system. They put it in the back part where you cannot see, and then eventually the results will come out of these machines right here. Now look, the target is around midnight here, depending on how many of those election day ballots they do have. We should be getting many of the numbers again early on, Jake, from this area. And I just want to talk about those security measures for just a couple seconds here. Remember, there were those two Fulton County workers who had to testify before Congress about the racism, the harassment, the threats they received after, look, people and the former president put them at the center of a conspiracy theory. As they testified, completely destroyed their lives. The county says they are very cognizant about protecting their workers. They have plenty of security layers in here. The state has done more to protect those workers, and they are all in full effect tonight, both for the ballots, but also the people who have dedicated their time to making sure this election can run smoothly.
All right, Diane, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's go over to Pamela Brown now. She's at the voting desk, and she's breaking down the pre-election vote because there was early voting. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. There have been some record days of early voting, but the overall number of early votes for this runoff is far less than the runoff in January 2021, due in part to a much shorter timeline this time around. It was 9 weeks then compared to 4 weeks this time around. So here's what we know. Big picture here. Nearly 1.9 million Georgians voted early in this runoff election. That is compared with 3.1 million early votes in the 2021 runoff that elected Warnock to the Senate. Now, keep in mind here, we still don't know the total number of election day votes that have been cast today, and that is really important. But let's look at a further breakdown here. More than 1.7 million were early in-person votes, and there are also about 174,000 mail-in ballots. Those can continue to be received today, but they must be in by the time polls close tonight, except, and we should really emphasize this, except in Cobb County, where a judge ordered the deadline be extended until December 9th after some voters requested absentee ballots and never received them. So big picture, and Diane touched on this a little bit, but bottom line is election officials were able to start processing early in-person and mail ballots prior to today. They were able to start counting this morning, which will hopefully mean we'll see results quickly when the polls close at 7 p.m. I've spoken to several county officials in Georgia, and they all say those pre-election votes will be the first round in some of the key counties: Gwinnett, Fulton, DeKalb. Also, Georgia election official Gabe Sterling said earlier today that statewide voting is going very smoothly and that only 3 out of the thousands of precincts are experiencing lines longer than 20 minutes. Jay?
All right, Pamela, thanks so much. Joining us now is Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican who just won re-election last month. Good to see you, Secretary Raffensperger. What kind of voter turnout did the state see today?
We're having a very strong turnout. It started out a little bit slower, but we are looking at 110 to 120,000 voters per hour. We think right now we're about 1.33 million voters as of 6 o'clock, and that'll push us very close to what we had for the same election day voting we had a month ago, about 1.5 million, not quite. But it's been strong. It's been steady. Lines have been short. Average wait time right now, statewide, is about 3 minutes. Longest we saw on the leaderboard before I came up here was about 14 minutes. We had a couple that were 30 minutes, but it's been a smooth process, and just voters are going through bit by bit, and it's been slow and steady all day long.
Were you made aware of any irregularities at any voting locations today?
There were just a few minor. There's, I believe, one precinct in Fulton County that started a little bit late, so they'll be open to 7:20. But it was really isolated situations like that, so nothing of any major import. We have 2,500 precincts, and when you think about that, less than a handful, less than a dozen will be, staying open past, 7 p.m. It really just shows you the counties have really been, on their game today, doing great work, and at the end of the day, we'll have these results posted very quickly.
The runoff campaign was only 4 weeks. The 2021 runoff took place in January, obviously. It was 9 weeks. CNN reporters on the ground heard from many voters today who were not able to vote early because the lines and wait times were too long. Do you think shortening the length of runoffs, shortening the number of days for early votes, is really the best way to make sure everyone who is a legal voter is able to cast their ballot?
Well, 4 years ago, I was in a runoff with a PSC commissioner also, and we had a 4-week runoff period. And what we did, we incorporated ranked choice voting, instant runoff, with our UOCAVA, our overseas military ballots, which allowed us to shorten our federal runoff races down to 4 weeks. So all runoffs in Georgia now are 4 weeks. But we will work with the General Assembly and the counties. They have an awful lot to do right after the November election. They have to get ready for a risk limiting audit and other situations. So we understand there's a lot on their plate, but I think one of the things we want to do is make sure we have enough precincts that are open and available for early voting, since it is a shorter period of 5 days of early voting. We also want to make sure that the General Assembly is more clear on how many days of early voting will that be. Will it be, 5, 6, 7? What is the exact number, so that we don't have these late-minute lawsuits by activists, attorneys, and then activist judges making decisions. We think that the state, General Assembly should decide these things and, clarify the law.
Earlier today, the special counsel investigating Donald Trump's attempt to subvert the 2020 election, Jack Smith, subpoenaed elections officials in Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona, trying to get any communications between themselves and then President Donald Trump and his 2020 campaign. As an elections official yourself, you've testified before the Fulton County grand jury, also looking into Trump's efforts to overturn the election results, specifically in Georgia. What do you make of this?
Well, they're doing their work, but in Georgia, I showed after the 2020 race that we had a fair and honest account. In fact, we counted those ballots 3 times. We did a hand recount, 100% of all the paper ballots, and recounted, and President Trump still came up short. And so we've done our work. I sent a letter to Congress, and so they have all the information out there. And just like today, we're having a fair and honest election. One of the candidates was going to come up short, the other one's going to win. And I know that one of the campaigns will be happy doing handstands, the other one will be disappointed. But we're going to make sure we have an honest vote. Everyone knows that their vote counts, and we are going to audit this race, so that we will do that through the hand counting process also, and so that people know this is the person that won this race. You can't argue with an audit. You can't argue with the machines count actually lining up exactly with what you get with an audit.
All right. Thank you so much, Secretary Raffensperger. We're closing in on the first results in the high-stakes Senate runoff as the election plays out. Donald Trump might be in even more legal peril tonight than he was at the start of the day, after the January 6th Select House Committee revealed it has decided to make criminal referrals to the U.S. Department of Justice. Stay with us.
A suspenseful night in Atlanta and the rest of Georgia. Voters have about half an hour left to cast ballots in a critical runoff election. They're deciding the final balance of power in the United States Senate for the next 2 years. I'm Anderson Cooper. We're back CNN's coverage of election night in America continued. As we await the first results from Georgia, there's significant new legal trouble in Trump world tonight. The jury has found 2 Trump Organization companies guilty on all counts in a criminal tax fraud trial in New York. And the January 6th Select Committee revealed it will make criminal referrals to the Justice Department. CNN's Jamie Gangel has more. So, Jamie, this is largely symbolic. The Justice Department doesn't need a criminal referral, but talk about their decisions.
So, first of all, our understanding is Donald Trump is likely to be one of those criminal referrals. One source said to me front and center. But what's key here is to expect referrals for other people. We don't know how many. We don't know the names yet. But one source told us the other referrals will be, quote, focused on the main organizers and leaders of the attacks. And Anderson, while you said it is symbolic, there is something important about doing this. First of all, the committee considers this a critical part of their work for the record, for history, to complete their investigation. But let's not forget, the committee has been ahead of the Justice Department. They have a lot of testimony, evidence, interviews that the Justice Department doesn't have. So when these referrals go to Justice Department, it is a letter. We can expect underlying evidence, testimony, information to go to justice that they probably don't have yet. That is critical. One source said to me, it would be notable if we did not make the criminal referrals, Anderson.
So they don't have, so the Department of Justice does not have all the information right now that the committee has?
Not even close, nothing. The committee had said that they were going to give certain transcripts over. They then thought again about that. The latest from the committee is when they make the transcripts, the interviews, the notes public, and they will make them public, at that time, the Department of Justice will get them too. So there is a lot of information about to come over the transom.
And do you have any sense of when this may occur, when this referral might go public?
The question I get asked a lot. So there is a possibility that the committee will release its final report. They will have a hearing. They will come together. They will vote on the final report, maybe the week of the 12th, maybe the week of December 19th, before Christmas.
All right. Jimmy Gangel, appreciate it. Back with her team here in New York. Alyssa, what impact do you think, if any, this has on the former president?
It's significant. To Jamie's point, it's largely symbolic. The Department of Justice doesn't necessarily have to take up the referral, but she's absolutely right that the committee has a lot of information that DOJ doesn't have. So, for example, Tony Ornato sat down, a former deputy chief of staff at the White House, sat down with the committee, who has yet to my knowledge, sat down with the grand jury. So there is any number of interviews that have taken place with the committee that is information DOJ doesn't have. And as we all remember, the Cassidy Hutchinson testimony that was shocking and really kind of put the ball in motion going forward. DOJ wasn't even really aware of her as a potential witness. So I think this is significant just in the treasure trove of information that they may hand over.
And you know, the kind of things they're thinking of, and think about the former president in terms of these things, as obstruction of an official proceeding, but conspiracy to defraud the United States government. And so if they make a criminal referral to the Justice Department on Donald Trump, saying that you conspired to defraud the United States government, it's one more thing. It's one more thing for Donald Trump to have to deal with, even if the Justice Department, it's symbolic, the Justice Department can say, we're not going to deal with this right now. We have our own investigation going on. We have a special counsel, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, it is really important, given all the work they have done. All of these other people have been prosecuted for storming the Capitol. How can you leave people like the president's attorneys who are conspiring, et cetera, out of it?
For the, Scott, I mean, for the president, the former president's campaign, such as it is, I mean, not much of a campaign so far, but his announcement, does this impact it?
Well, he's had a really bad month. I mean, he announced his campaign. It was super flat. The midterms have been widely interpreted by a lot of Republicans as a repudiation of his impact on the party. And a lot of folks that I think used to really support him are rethinking whether we want to go through this again. So this is another reminder.
There was also the neo-Nazi white supremacist launch and the tearing up the Constitution.
And just as important, and his saying we have to tear up the Constitution, which I think on January 6th, that's what he also said. I mean, when you're the president, you take an oath. best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. He failed on January 6th. He's now saying it again. So all of this is just a story for Republicans to consider about whether you want to drag these heavy bags through another campaign only to have the American people tell us for a third time, we don't want it.
I think it's important is that Congress is doing its job to the best that it can. Congress can do a lot of stuff. It can pass bills. It can debate. It can't put people in jail. It can't hold people criminally accountable. That is an executive branch function. They are doing everything they can for the alley-oop. This is what do we have to do to show that we have equal justice in this country? If you had anybody doing the kind of stuff that Trump was doing, that he would be in a lot more legal trouble. And I think from a historical point of view, I think this Congress wants to do all that it can to get this Department of Justice to do something in the situation.
Especially since you know that this Congress, where the Republicans are now going to be in control and that the committee is going to be dismantled. And so this has to be kind of the end of the chapter, maybe on the January 6th investigation from a congressional viewpoint. I will say, though, to your question, does this do anything to Trump? I don't think so. And I don't think so because there still is a significant component of the base in the Republican Party that is standing by him. And no matter, they didn't vote for the Democrats or Liz Cheney that are on the committee. So them referring this to the Justice Department, I don't think actually.
Lieutenant Governor Duncan, does the failures that the former president has had in the candidates he has pushed for this last election, does that do him more damage than this?
Yeah, this is just another data point that accelerates his decay rate, right? I think it's undeniable. And I think to that point, this is probably the first cycle that he's dealing with less than a majority of Republicans, right? It's undeniable that there's less than a majority of Republicans that support his pathway. And, you know, I think now more than ever, he's more toxic than ever. And so if you're a Republican candidate sitting there wanting to run a Senate race or a congressional race or a gubernatorial race, the last thing you want is Donald Trump to show up in your town, a la Georgia. Herschel Walker distanced himself as hard and fast as he possibly could when it probably needed, you know, counted the most, but it was a toxic move if he would have brought him to Georgia.
And given, let's talk about Georgia. I mean, you're the lieutenant governor. What are you going to be watching for? What counties? What should our viewers be watching for in the next hour?
Yeah, this is a turnout race. Who can motivate the base? And certainly there's been a lot of time in the Republican circles trying to express the importance of the judicial nominees and the balance of the committees, and that's important. I just don't know if there's enough ink in that barrel to be able to articulate that to the average voter that you know, for the majority of those Republicans are just trying to figure out which way's up, you know, in Georgia. You know, Donald Trump has just kind of done a rope-a-dope with them for the last 2 years, confused them, and really going to rob them of another Senate pick, most likely, a senator that's a conservative.
As we get closer to the final results out of Georgia, or the first results, I should say, we'll go live to a county that could be key in deciding the Senate runoff. We'll be back in a moment.
The balance of power in the United States Senate is on the line right now, and one specific state will be the decider. We're following the runoff election in Georgia right now. The first results are just minutes away. Let's check in right now with CNN's Nick Valencia. He's at a polling place in Marietta, Georgia, which is outside Atlanta in pivotal Cobb County. And Nick, you have information about turnout there today. Tell us more.
That's right. Good evening, Jay. Cobb County had a record number of early voters, which is why election workers I've spoken to at this precinct are surprised by what they're seeing tonight. Walk with me a little bit while I talk about what we're hearing here. They did not expect to see the number of in-person voters that they saw in November come out tonight, but that's exactly what they expect with just a few minutes to go before the polls close. They say they may match the in-person turnout that they saw in November. Cobb County, of course, is a crucial county about 15 miles outside of Atlanta city center, and it's one of the many counties across the state that Republican nominee Herschel Walker far underperformed Governor Brian Kemp, with Kemp able to secure about 40,000 more votes than Walker during the midterm election. In recent years, it has trended Democrat, even though Walker would really love to win this. Right now, you can see here there are really no lines. People coming in and out. About 5 minutes to vote with no lines right now. We'll see what that all means at the end of the night, Jake.
All right, thanks so much, Nick Valencia in Marietta, Georgia. And John, how are the votes going to be reported this evening?
Important to remember, especially if you were with us a month ago, or if you were with us 2 years and a month ago, we have to be patient as we watch this play out. You're looking at the clean map now, no votes yet. We'll get them top of the hour. You see about 20 minutes away. We should start getting votes, and that's the challenge. We will start to get votes pretty quickly. I want to go back to a month ago, just so people can see the color in on the map here. Nick is right here in Cobb County. This is the suburban color around Atlanta right there. Jake, about 50%. About 50% of the vote's going to come from right there inside that circle, and you see it's blue right there. So what happens? Most of these counties early on, they can tabulate the early votes and release them soon after 7 o'clock. So we are likely to see Raphael Warnock open up an early lead. Then we have to be patient and watch as the Election Day vote gets counted. Republicans are counting on the Election Day vote. So let's go back in time and just remind people how this played out. This is 1 month ago. All right, let me get rid of the circle up there. At first, votes came in at 7 o'clock. We got a small amount of votes right here in the Augusta area. Then you watch at 8 o'clock. This is the governor's race. Let me come back to the Senate race here to make it. Okay, we got to go back. Let me go back to the beginning. Start over.
We got gremlins.
Let's go start over again. No, what happens when
There we go.
That's not gremlins. That's called operator error. Now let's come back here. So at 8 o'clock, the same thing happens. 7 o'clock, we got Augusta. 8 o'clock, you see Warnock jump out to that big lead, right? So you're saying, wow, this is going to be a blowout. No, that's the early vote, and it's disproportionately Democratic. So you wait, and at 9 o'clock, Herschel Walker takes the lead, right? By a narrow margin, 2,700 votes there. And this is a competitive state. So what happens? 6 minutes later, some votes come in from DeKalb County, and Warnock jumps out to a lead. And then you move on a little bit later, 10:15, again, an hour and a little change. Herschel Walker goes back in the lead. Remember, we were going through this. This was a very competitive race. Midnight, Walker still in the lead there. Then you get to 2 a.m., Warnock back in the lead. And then you come to the next morning, and Warnock's lead is a little bit more, but still less than 1 point there at 49%. And then when you come out, here's where we ended up, right? When we ended up, you take that off. We ended up there, and that's why we're in the runoff. So if early on, you see a lot of blue on the map, if you're in the Warnock campaign, that's great. That means you turn out your early votes and you're building a lead. Let's be patient. Let's watch through the night. It's likely to be like it was a month ago.
And for those who aren't familiar with this entirely, the Georgia law is that you have to reach 50%, and neither of them reach 50% in November. They don't have to do that tonight. Right, but there's only 2 candidates on the ballot, so they will.
Two candidates on the ballot. Somebody will. Somebody will. You have to walk into your vote and walk out, leave it blank, or I guess you could scribble on it, but somebody wins.
Somebody will get 50%.
Wins tonight or tomorrow when we're done counting. Somebody will win in this runoff, yes.
And the Libertarian candidate was key to neither of them getting 50%. That won't be there. Right. We're just minutes away from the first results out of Georgia in this final election of 2022. It's all coming up after this break. We'll be right back. We are nearing the first results, actual results from Atlanta and all across Georgia as election night in America continues. We're also following a huge new development here in Washington in the January 6th investigation. The House Select Committee revealing it will make criminal referrals to the U.S. Department of Justice. That could potentially include Donald Trump. We're back in the CNN Election Center with our special coverage. Georgia polling places close just a few minutes from now in the high-stakes runoff election that will determine the final balance of power in the United States Senate. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker are facing off again after each of them failed to get more than 50% of the vote in the November election. A win for Warnock would strengthen the Democrats' control of the Senate by giving them an outright majority of 51 seats. That would help President Biden and the Democrats as they try to hold the line in the Senate against the new Republican-controlled House of Representatives. A win for Herschel Walker would mean that the balance of power in the Senate remains as it is now, evenly split, 50-50, giving Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and Republicans a key victory after they failed to take back control of the Senate, and their hopes of a red wave in the midterms fizzled. We'll get early clues about how this night is going soon when voting ends in Georgia. Right now, let's go to our correspondents on the ground in the Peach State. First to Eva McKen. She's at the headquarters of the Democrat, Senator Raphael Warnock. And Eva, how's the Warnock camp feeling about its strategy in the runoff?
You know, they are feeling confident tonight, Jake. Something that Senator Warnock's campaign employed was really reaching out to these Kemp voters, these Republican, conservative, independent voters that supported both Governor Kemp and Senator Warnock in the general election, trying to get more of those voters to cross over in this runoff. You know, I asked Sarah Riggs Amico. She's a campaign surrogate for Senator Warnock now, but she was the lieutenant governor candidate in 2018. If this was the right strategy, did it come at a cost? Did it come at alienating the progressive base here? And she said no, because all the while Senator Warnock did that, she said that he never compromised on some of these progressive democratic values that he has. I also spoke with Warnock supporters, and they told me that they are more progressive than he is, and they understand his position and what it takes to win in a state like this one. So I can say that the campaign is feeling confident about this strategy to appeal to these split-ticket voters tonight.
All right, Eva McCann with Raphael Warnock at his headquarters. Let's go to Jeff Zeleny right now in Herschel Walker's headquarters. How did that campaign feel about the campaign strategy? They were obviously knocked off course several times because of Herschel Walker's scandals in his personal life.
They were indeed, and despite that, Jake, Herschel Walker still came within 37,000 votes of besting Senator Raphael Warnock in the November election. So going into this runoff period, there is no doubt that the Warnock campaign had momentum and money on their side. In fact, Democrats outspending the Republican side here more than 2-to-1, just dramatically on television. But the Walker campaign believes that heavy election day turnout that they are seeing across the state, particularly in the northern parts of Georgia via conservative areas, is keeping them in this ballgame. They believe that the election day turnout, I'm told by one advisor, was stronger than we expected. So they believe that this turnout can perhaps help overcome some of the early voting advantages. Some 1.9 million Georgians have already voted going into Election Day, but the Walker campaign knows that it has to win about 60% of the Election Day vote to have a strong showing here. But Jake, they also feel, I'm told, that they've been abandoned by some Republicans. The Democratic whole establishment came here, of course, former President Obama and others, and the Walker campaign largely left on their own in terms of money. But tonight they're feeling somewhat hopeful, seeing a path because of Election Day turnout. Jake?
All right, Jeff Zeleny at Walker headquarters in Atlanta. Let's turn to David Chalian right now. David, tell us more about what we know about Warnock and Walker voters as we're awaiting the first results in this runoff.
Yeah, Jake, we did a deep dive into the November 8th election, so there wasn't an exit poll about today's electorate, but we wanted to take a look at the Walker and Warnock coalitions because it sort of sets the stage for what each campaign is looking for in their turnout today. So back in the November exit poll, what you see here among Warnock voters, look at them by race. This is the Warnock coalition. 36% of Warnock's voters on November 8th were white. 52% of the Warnock voters were African American, 8% Latino. Take a look at the Warnock voters by age, okay? So young voters, 18 to 29-year-old, made up 16% of Warnock's vote. 25% of Warnock's voters were 30 to 44, 38% 45 to 64, 21% were senior citizens. Let's look at the reverse now with Herschel Walker. So among Walker voters, 87% of Walker voters were white. Only 5% of Walker voters were black, 5% of Walker voters Latino. He's obviously looking to get that white vote turnout since it's part of a huge part of his coalition. And look here among age, the best category here for Walker, 45 to 64-year-olds made up 44% of Walker voters. Nearly 30% were 65 and older. He's looking for a whiter, older electorate to show up today on Election Day. And then, of course, we asked the importance of party control in the Senate to your vote. Among Warnock voters back in November, 74% of Warnock voters said it's very important. It was true for both candidates, but look at this. Walker voters, even more of them thought that party control was very important to their vote. 82% of Walker voters said which party controls the Senate was very important to their vote, and that, of course, is an argument taken away in this runoff. They don't have that because we know Democrats will control the Senate. Jake? Oh, damn it, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much. Fascinating numbers, David. I want to turn to some new reporting, Manu, that you have about candidate quality among Republicans.
Yeah, and real concerns about that when they look at what happened here and their failure to take back the Senate. We'll see if they lose in Georgia tonight, but seeing what happened in Arizona, where they lost a race that they thought they could win, Pennsylvania, a race they thought they could win. We'll see what happens in Georgia. The push among top Republicans is to get more heavily involved in the primaries in the next election cycle to avoid a repeat of what happened here, because this election cycle, the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, led by Rick Scott, decided not to engage, decided to let the primaries process play out. Now they want to take a heavier hand. One of the person who suggested as such was Senator John Cornyn. He said elections are, the candidate quality is so significant here, and he would know. He was chairman of the committee when they had nominated lackluster candidates about a decade ago.
And then
what happened?
They didn't take the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, this is so fascinating because the reason they didn't weigh in on these primaries was Trump. Trump, they knew, was going to back some candidates that they weren't comfortable with. And so what they're saying in between the lines of what Cornyn told you and others is that they are maybe next time around willing to go up against Trump in the primaries. But this is something we have to see to believe, because it's easy to say it now, but when it's a question of do you poke the bear in Donald Trump or do you leave well enough alone, I really want to see what Republicans.
Yeah, and even pre-Trump, I mean, the Tea Party, anybody, it's just, it doesn't always work like that.
And Trump being a surrogate for the base of the Republican Party, too.
Yeah. We will definitely believe it when we see it. Jake.
Dana, thanks so much. So I'm here with John King at the Magic. Well, this is the best part of the night because, you know, forget the pollsters, forget the prognosticators, forget the pundits. It's up to the voters, and in just a few minutes, they are going to speak, and we're going to hear their voices. What are you going to be looking for?
And they have either cast their ballots or they're in line, and if they're in line, they can wait. A couple polling stations to stay open a little bit. So what do we look for early on? We talked earlier. We do expect early votes to come in soon. So this will fill in. Some of it will fill in pretty quickly. You're likely to see a lot of blue, especially up in this area. If you're a Democrat, you'll get excited. If you're a Republican, you might get nervous. Hang in. Be patient. This count is going to take at least a couple hours. So let's go back to where we were a month ago to explain that. You just heard David going through the election. You heard everyone, so your reporters in the field saying, Jeff Zeleny especially, the Republicans are happy with turnout today. Their math, Jake, was to guess somewhere around that Herschel Walker needs to win somewhere around 60% of the ballots cast today, right? So that's not what we're going to see right away. We're going to see the early vote first. As you start to see other votes come in, especially when we move up here, some of these smaller rural counties. Now, this race is not going to be won or lost in Gilmer County. It's the 57th largest of 159 counties. There's not a lot of people here. But did people turn out to vote? Did people turn out in these conservative counties? Or did they just turn out last month because they were voting for the governor? Or are they excited about Herschel Walker in the runoff? So in these smaller counties, where's the turnout? And is the number up like that? Is Herschel Walker getting 80%, 70% in these small rural counties? That will be the test of whether the Election Day vote was what he wanted. And then when we come down here, let me come over this way to Gwinnett this time. Again, a month ago, 39% in a Democratic suburb, formerly a Republican area suburb, but this has become more Democratic. Donald Trump is one of the reasons for that. So can the Trump-endorsed candidate improve his standing in the suburbs? 39% a month ago compared again to 44% for the governor. Those margins are critical. So we might see some of that in the early vote. When you get some of the early vote that comes in this area, is it a little closer than it was a month ago for Herschel Walker? That would be an early sign that he is more competitive in this election. And then you want to see, if you're the Warnock campaign, Jake, what you're looking to do is build a big lead. Build a big lead early on, because you do know history tells you that Republicans turn out on Election Day. And 1 month ago, for all the talk, Joe Biden did win Georgia, despite what Donald Trump says. Raphael Warnock did win the runoff 2 years ago. But just a month ago, Governor Brian Kemp won a very impressive re-election campaign. So there is no doubt that in Georgia, yes, it is available for Democrats to win. You would have to argue it's very competitive, perhaps even leaning a little bit to the Republican way now. The challenge now, Jake, is can Herschel Walker overcome the personal controversies, not the best run campaign, being way outspent by the Democrats as we get into the final days. We're going to find out in just a few seconds as we get our first votes from the runoff.
That's right, a lot of headwinds. Polling places are closing in the Georgia Senate runoff, and voters across the state are getting the last word on the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. We have a key race alert right now for you, and right now it is too early to call the U.S. Senate runoff between Democratic incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican challenger and football star Herschel Walker. We hope to know more soon once the first official votes are reported in Georgia. Remember, this is what is at stake here. Democrats have won 50 U.S. Senate seats so far. They have locked up control of the chamber with the tie-breaking vote of Vice President Kamala Harris. Republicans have won 49 seats so far. The outcome of this election, this Georgia runoff, will determine if Democrats have an outright majority or if the Senate remains evenly divided 50-50. Let's go to Diane Gallagher at a key vote counting location in Fulton County, Georgia, the biggest population-wise county in Georgia. It contains some of Atlanta. Diane, tell us now what's going on, given that voting has stopped.
Nearly every single polling place in the state of Georgia has now closed. Again, if someone was already in line when the polling place closed, they can still vote. So there may still be some votes coming in. But what we anticipate happening, and look, we're about to have a press conference right now. Jake, I'm going to let them talk. We anticipate to have some numbers from Fulton County talking about the daily numbers. This is a county that had roughly 200,000 early votes that they started processing at 2 o'clock this afternoon. They will begin uploading right now, and we could be getting details. I've been refreshing to see right now on the website to see if they could come in yet. They say that we should have those by 7:30 or 8 o'clock, much earlier than we are used to because of changes in the law. So we anticipate to start getting information about those roughly 200,000 votes in Fulton County and around the rest of the state in the coming hour. We're going to learn more about those daily votes here in Fulton County in just a few moments here when they begin speaking. We know that the County Board of Elections just met afterward to discuss the day, and we will hear more about that right now, Jake.
All right, Diane, we'll let the press conference begin. Let's go back to Pamela Brown. She's at our voting desk waiting for the first votes to drop. Pamela, what specifically are you watching for?
Well, we're watching the 4 largest counties in the state. I want to take a closer look at them. As you see here, Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, and Gwinnett, all in the Atlanta area, and when we might start to see results tonight. That is key. So right now, homing in on Cobb County right now, as you see right here, having some issues there with the tablet, but in Cobb County, they expect the first vote report around 8:15 p.m., and those will likely be early in-person votes. Then they expect to update their vote totals around every 45 minutes from there. And then you want to go over to DeKalb. And DeKalb, there's no estimate on when we're going to see their first results, but they will first report early in-person votes, followed by mail ballots, and then Election Day votes. And then heading over to Fulton County, that's where we just heard from Diane. The first vote is expected between 8 and 9 p.m. But as she said, they could come in earlier. So we're waiting to see that. We'll see early in-person votes first, and then Election Day votes. They expect to update their reports every 30 minutes or so. And then in Gwinnett, another large county there, and the Atlanta area, the first vote report will include the early in-person and most of the mail ballots. They expect Election Day vote reports to come in between 8:30 and 9 p.m. with updates every 15 to 20 minutes. And just a reminder for you, in the election last month, Georgia officials counted 99% of votes by 2 a.m., and that was all statewide races. So tonight, just one race. So hopefully an indicator that we will get results soon. Jake?
Hopefully. John King, now the voters are speaking, and we're going to start to see these little counties fill up with votes. Which counties are you keeping an eye on right now?
159 of them in Georgia. So Pam just went through the 4 largest, which is obviously, again, I told you before, I'm going to leave it gray. I'm not going to go to the old map just in case new votes come in. But if you do that, inside that circle is more than 50%. I drew it wide enough that it's actually probably closer to 60% of the vote. So Atlanta and the big suburbs around it is where most of the vote is. But what Pam said is absolutely critical as you're watching at home tonight. Every one of these votes counts. Every one of these votes is real. But we are likely to see, and here you go. Here's your first votes of the night coming in. And so let's see where they're coming from. As you see them, you're most likely seeing in most of these places early ballots. Some of these smaller counties, let's just go to the Republican county first. It's Brantley County, 94th of 159. So it's at the bottom, heading toward the bottom. But Herschel Walker, again, you're not going to get a lot of math here. It's a smaller county population-wise, but that's what Herschel Walker needs to do. If Herschel Walker is to be competitive tonight in these smaller, rural Republican counties, he needs to run it up. The question is, and we'll know this as we get a little later into the count, how much is turnout down? And is it disproportionate? Do we see a difference, right? Is the drop in turnout more disproportionate in Democratic areas or Republican areas, or is it down just about everywhere across the board? That's one of the things you look for in a runoff election. And so then you come up here. This is the same. Richmond County reported first a month ago as well. These were the first votes that came in a month ago. It's the 10th largest, about 2% of the statewide population. And again, they say this is about 57% of the estimated vote. That means they think a lot of people voted early in Richmond County. So 79%. Let's just go back.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but 57% reporting. So this is 57% of the
estimated vote.
The estimated vote, and that's early vote and a same-day vote?
Yes, early vote. That is an estimate made by our excellent decision team, and that could change throughout the night as you get later. You get the final turnout. Right now, the polls are closed, so we will know the polls. We will get more a little bit later as you pull out and see. So here you go. Your first votes in Fulton County, and this is the largest county in the state. And again, this is an estimate, very early on. Be careful of that number. I'm not telling you it's wrong. It's just we have to get the final turnout numbers. Then there'll be a tweak in the estimated vote number. We know this based on what they've told us they have in early votes. We know what they have in early votes, and we know the patterns in the state. So that's Raphael Warnock, 82% in Fulton County now. If you go back 1 month ago, he's at 74%. If Senator Warnock tonight in the runoff can keep that number there, and this is early votes, so it's likely we're going to see more Election Day votes. They tend to be more Republican, but he needs to keep the number in Fulton County above 70. I would say his campaign would say above 75 as we go through that, but now you're beginning to see this is the magic of counting votes. They're starting to fill in on election night, and you're starting to get them a little bit everywhere, right? So you have, this is 135,000 vote lead right now, but again, we went through this a month ago. Warnock jumped out to a big lead. Then Walker pulled out to a lead.
Back and forth.
And we had the seesaw back and forth as we count votes. So every vote counts. Every vote matters. Let's be patient as it starts to fill in. But Georgia, for all the controversy Donald Trump has tried to cause Georgia does a very good job counting votes. The counties do a good job. They report it into the state. They do an excellent job. And again, as Pam was noting, only one race tonight. There's a couple of runoffs in some smaller areas around the state as well, but there's only one big statewide race tonight, so we'll get results pretty quickly.
Are we expecting the same number of people to vote today and in the early voting for this election as voted in November? Because as you note, there was a governor's race, there were House races, there was the Senate race, obviously. Are we expecting the same number? Because it seems as though, and I'm just going by the estimate, so that's not scientific, but it seems as though the numbers, not the percentages now I'm talking about, but the numbers might be down a little from November. Total.
The expectation is the raw math, the raw numbers. If you go back, let's just look at the governor's race. And you look at 2.1 million to 1.8 million, 28,000 there. The expectation is that raw number drops. Although Gabe Sterling, but you had Brad Raffensperger on, the Secretary of State,
right.
His chief deputy, just a few moments ago, was talking about how he thought that turnout today was surprisingly strong, and they think they're actually going to be relatively close to where they were a month ago. When we get the final number, that's an interesting comparison, because that was one of the big questions. Number one, it's a runoff, right? The people of Georgia are voting and voting and voting. It will drop some. How much? Especially when you realize it's not for control of the Senate, it's just for whether it's 50-50 or 51. Does that convince some Republicans to stay home? Are there Republicans who voted for Walker, but they really turned out a month ago to vote for the governor? Or are there people who just don't want to vote again? So that's a fascinating question in a runoff. As we watch this fill in right now, this is all early vote.
Right.
That's what we're told so far. So we're not counting Election Day balloting yet. And so this is what you expected, the Democrat to take a big early lead. But again, this is a tiny slice of the vote, and we're going to count them. And this is filling in. That it's coming in from around the state pretty quickly is a good sign.
Yeah.
Now we just have to be patient and count votes.
So pick one of these red counties where Herschel Walker needed to get turnout high. Obviously, he was going to win the county whether 5 people or 5,000 turned out, but just pick one of them. Okay. So this is 50% reporting, and somebody out there do the math for me. That's like what? That's like 4,500 voters,
right?
Something like that. And if it's 50%, so it's about, and this is very rough and just estimate, about 9,000 people voted for the runoff. So if we go back and see how many people voted in
Right,
in November?
We can go back and look, and we'll look at the raw math tonight. The thing I would urge people to look at is watch this, right? Does he meet or surpass his percentages in these counties? And then when we get a better number, because if you go back again, he was at 70%. Now again, we only have early votes so far, so just because we're showing you a number, he's at 70% a month ago. He's at 58% right now. If that holds up, yeah, Herschel Walker's in trouble. But there's no reason.
Right, but this is early vote.
We have a long way to go.
Yeah.
And it's all early vote. It's all early vote, and we know the Democrats tend to perform better, even in Republican counties, even in these red counties. I'll pick another one for you up here, Wilkes County. This is all early vote. The Democrat is getting 48%. You go back a month ago, in the end, it was 58 to 40. So what you're seeing here is in the first early votes, even in places where Senator Warnock, let me come back to today so I'm not confusing people, even in places where Senator Warnock is trailing, he's closer than he's likely to be at the end of the night. Right. Because you're getting the early votes, and Democrats tend to disproportionately vote early.
Right, but I guess what I'm wondering is if, since this was a challenge, get people to vote again, right? I mean, Raphael Warnock has now run for this Senate seat literally 5 times in 2 years, right? So there might be some voter exhaustion going on, not to mention all the craziness of the presidency. Did the Democrats get their voters to the polls? Forget the percentages for a second, just in the numbers versus the Republican-leaning counties. We'll come back and talk about this because more votes from Georgia could drop at any moment. We're going to squeeze in a quick break. We're going to have new results on the other side, I hope. I have a key race alert for you now with roughly 11% of the vote in. Incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock has taken the lead with 63.7% of the vote. Herschel Walker, the Republican, has 36.3% of the vote. Warnock right now with more than a 100,000 vote lead, but it is early. And right now they are counting the votes cast early, which disproportionately tend to favor Democrats. So this is not necessarily indicative of anything in terms of the final results. Still, all things being equal, I'd rather be up 100,000 votes than not.
Well, if you want to just extend that a bit, you need to be if you're Senator Warnock,
right.
because you know the early voting is disproportionately your vote, disproportionately Democratic vote. You had a shorter early voting window period in this runoff. So that was the challenge for the Warnock campaign: get as many voters get as many as possible of their voters out in that shorter window, and then you know, because of the registrations, who didn't vote and try to turn them out today. So if you're in the Warnock campaign, yes, that's what you need to do to open up. In both campaign headquarters, trust me, they have this down to the T of how many voters they think they needed today. And again, the Republicans believe they entered about 10 points down, 8 to 10 points down today in terms of the early vote. So they need around 60% of the votes cast today. It's going to be more than an hour. You know, it's what, 7:15, 7:16 right now in the East. Around 8:30, 9 o'clock, we're going to start to see more. What you're looking here in the map right now is almost exclusively early votes. And so you expect the Democrat to take a lead. And again, so even in these Republican counties, right, Herschel Walker's getting 52% in Wilkes County right now, right? So just go back a month ago in the Senate race, he gets 58%. So what you're seeing right now is again, these are their votes, they're legally cast, and they're legally and properly counted. They're just not the full pie.
And they tend to favor Democrats.
Right, they tend to favor Democrats because that's what you're seeing first, because they've had these votes. You know, they've had these votes in the county offices for days now. The early voting ended Friday, and the counties are allowed to verify them and tabulate them, and then they can release the tabulations once the polls close. So that's what we're seeing, essentially, you know, what they've already had, verified, sorted, counted. Bam, you get that. Now they go about the business of counting the votes cast today.
So in Georgia, and every state's different, right. In Georgia, they are allowed to count early votes before Election Day.
Right.
Yes?
That's why when you were talking to Diane Gallagher and she was there in Fulton County, which is here, let's just bring it up again. Look, you know, this is what Senator Warnock needs to do. Again, we are very early in the count. But Fulton County, Atlanta, and the suburbs around it, this is the Democratic stronghold of the state right here. You need to run it up. And in the early vote, he is running it up. But yes, so they were able to, after Friday, early voting stops. So you have over the weekend into Tuesday, they can get everything in order. They can run the tabulation today. They can start tabulating those votes. And once the polls close, if they want to, it's up to the counties. But that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing early votes come out more quickly.
Because just for everybody who's been paying attention to voting, and there's obviously been a heightened interest in it since the 2020 election, what some people call the red mirage or the blue mirage. I know we don't like to use that term because it's not a mirage. They're real votes. But the idea that some states count early votes early, right. Some votes don't count them early, right. And depending, for instance, Pennsylvania, same situation, early votes tend to favor Democrats, but they're not allowed to, not only are they not allowed to count them ahead of Election Day, they're not even allowed to prepare them and get them ready just to hit the button to have them counted. They're not allowed to do anything. So it's a lag, the exact opposite of the situation here in Georgia.
Right. It's just one state tonight and just one race, so it is less confusing. But again, if you go back to the 2020 example, you know, early in the night, Joe Biden was well ahead in Ohio and well ahead in Texas and well ahead, I believe, even in Florida. Didn't turn out that way. Those were early votes, right? Democrats disproportionately, because that's the way those states counted them. Different states do it different ways. Here in Georgia, we are seeing in most of these counties, this is all early votes. And you're starting to get a little bit more. I just want to move in. This is Douglas County, one of the suburbs. Again, a predominantly Democratic county. He's Senator Warnock right now in this early vote getting 70%. Just go back a month ago, 64%. So he's a little higher than his percentage a month ago. If that holds up in the end, good for him. That means he's overperforming himself a month ago. That would be a path. But again, important to remember, this is early on. And let's just come back to today and to where we are. But he's at 63% to 64 to 37, if you want to do it that way. If you're the Democratic campaign, you're saying, okay, but the Republican campaign knows they have to wait for this to fill in. And here, I just want to hit this because it's filled in a little bit. This is one of the places we should watch very closely tonight. This is Cherokee County, more of the excerpts, right? If you come back in here, you see Atlanta and the suburbs around it. These outer suburbs used to be more Republican. Brian Kemp was competitive in them a month ago. That's why he was so reelected governor. He didn't win them, but he was competitive. But he did win places like here. And this is one of the big questions in this runoff is Governor Kemp has lent his turnout operation. He has leaned in. He did not campaign at all with Walker in the general election. He did once in the runoff election, and he lent his organization to the Republicans for the runoff organization. This is one of the places. This is Herschel Walker at 62% right now. Let's go back 1 month ago in the governor's race. This was a 74% county for Brian Kemp. This is one of the places where, look, the governor a month ago was at 74%. Herschel Walker comes in at 67%. That drop-off is what crushed Walker.
Yep.
Republicans who voted for Kemp who did not vote. They either voted for Warnock, or they voted for Chase Oliver, the Libertarian, or they left the Senate race blank. And so as this map fills in tonight, and you come back out here, in these counties, these red counties, the exurbs around Atlanta, that's where Kemp is incredibly strong. Does his support this time help or not? That's one of the big questions.
And let's talk about that with CNN This Morning anchor Caitlin Collins, who's in Atlanta and has interviewed Governor Kemp. And Caitlin, Governor Kemp played a role in helping Herschel Walker, in this runoff. Tell us more about that.
And yeah, what John was just laying out there is potentially critical to what we see actually happen tonight. I actually spoke with a voter earlier who is one of those over 200,000 voters who went to the polls in November. They voted for Brian Kemp, but they did not vote for Herschel Walker. If more of them had, obviously we would not be in this situation. There would not be a runoff in Georgia tonight. But this voter, Ed Cordell, that I spoke with earlier, who had voted for the Libertarian candidate for Senate back then, actually went and cast his vote for Walker this time around. He said it was a difficult decision. He said it made it difficult a little bit to look the women in his family in the face, but he in the end felt that he wanted to cast his vote for Walker because of the power balance in the Senate. And he said, Jake and John, that Governor Kemp coming out and stumping for Walker and doing those fundraisers for him and cutting those ads for him is part of what factored into his decision. And he said he did not know if he would have voted for Walker in this runoff election if he had not seen that show of support from Governor Kemp. And of course, that was not a show of support we saw from Kemp during the actual general election. He and Walker largely kept their distance from each other, though I am told by sources that they did have a few conversations during that time period. They have also spoken during this runoff. They've had one rally together. They have had a fundraiser, several fundraisers that Kemp has done, and it is that get out the vote apparatus that Kemp built that he has lent to that McConnell-aligned super PAC that could be what really makes the change here at the end of the day. Because Kemp sources that we spoke with said they weren't, trying to change Herschel Walker, the candidate. He is who he is. We've seen that on the campaign trail, but they thought if they were fundraising and if they were getting out and getting Republican voters to actually turn out today, that could be what determines if Herschel Walker is the next senator and if he defeats Raphael Warnock in this race.
Right, Brian Kemp, the very popular, just freshly reelected governor of Georgia, who won not only Republicans but Democratic voters as well, giving almost a permission structure to people to vote for Herschel Walker. And beyond that, one of the messages, and I'd like to hear Caitlin comment on whether or not this was the prominent message from Brian Kemp. The clips I've seen of Brian Kemp in the ad that he cut for Herschel Walker and messages on the stump were very partisan, very who's going to turn out more, us or them, meaning Republicans or Democrats, very based on, putting on the team jerseys. Was that, whereas on the other hand, when you saw Barack Obama campaigning for Raphael Warnock, it was very much about the character of Raphael Warnock and what a strong person he was. Was that the general message of Kemp for Republicans? Turnout, Republicans need to turn out for this based on the party, not necessarily the candidate?
Exactly, Jake. That's also what Ed Cordell, that voter that I spoke with earlier, basically said is what it came down to. Not Herschel Walker himself, but the fact that he's a Republican. And that's how Kemp himself viewed it. His advisor said this is actually pretty clear cut, that he was going to come out and try to boost Walker in this race because he likes Walker's policies, Republican policies, more than those of Warnock. And so you saw that in his ads. They were reflected, sending that team message, basically saying to get out for Republicans to come out and vote. That's not the message you've seen in Warnock's ads. He's actually used and tied himself to Kemp's popularity, showing those voters who crisscrossed the aisle, voted for Kemp but voted for Warnock in his ads, or those who said they just could not vote for Walker at all. And so that is really what they're paying attention to here. Though I will say that people in Kemp's campaign have noted, that in Kemp's world have noted that Warnock has run a very savvy campaign here. He has had a very positive message in those ads in the closing days. That's because he does not want to turn off those moderate Republican voters who may cross the aisle and vote for him because they don't want Herschel Walker representing them in the Senate. And so that is something that they are paying close attention to. Also, just looking at where the candidates have been. There has been frustration in Walker's camp that he has not been more publicly available, that he took those 5 days off the campaign trail while you saw Warnock going place to place, going to Walker's hometown, going to these football games, and trying to get people to come out and vote. And so that is something that they are watching closely tonight. The Kemp campaign does feel like they did what they could to boost Walker. Obviously, they are waiting to see. One thing I'll note, Jake, is Governor Kemp is not going to be at any Walker watch parties tonight, watching these votes come in. They're waiting to see what happens themselves.
That Caitlin just ended with is such a fascinating point, and it's such a piece, a glimpse of this strategy here. The Republican Party is going to take 2, 4, 6, 8, maybe 10 years to sort itself out. They're still having the debate of who is Donald Trump, how important is he in our party, right? And so here's Brian Kemp, right? This is tonight's race right now, and this is still early votes, 17% around the estimate votes. Just want to point out where we are in the latest. Senator Warnock ahead at the moment. But we're talking about Brian Kemp. Let's just go back a month ago. After Joe Biden wins Georgia, everyone says Georgia's turning blue. Well, this is a statement Republican win in a purple state. Brian Kemp stood up to Donald Trump in 2020. Brian Kemp said, no, I won't help you cheat. Brian Kemp stays away from Herschel Walker in the general election, gets 53% of the vote, including being competitive in these suburbs. Why did he want no part of Herschel Walker in the general election? Because Donald Trump is toxic in the suburbs, and he was worried that Herschel Walker's association with Trump would hurt him, Brian Kemp. So he has nothing to do with Herschel Walker, gets this statement win, and then says, now I will help you. Now I will help you. And so that, number one, you could put it in selfish context if you want. If Walker loses tonight, Governor Kemp, who has his own ambitions beyond this, as the Republican Party sorts itself, says, I did my best. I made friends with Mitch McConnell. I gave my turnout operation. You cannot blame me. Right. But it's fascinating to me that Kemp keeps his distance, gets a statement win, essentially to prove to Donald Trump, this is how you win Georgia. This is how you win it convincingly against Stacey Abrams, a very credible, formidable candidate who knows how to turn out votes. Now Brian Kemp is helping Herschel Walker. We'll see as we count the votes tonight if it's enough. As Walker, we'll see if that helps Walker perform. But if nothing else, Kemp made a point a month ago. This is how you win. Now he's lending his help. We'll see if it works.
He also made a point when he defeated the Donald Trump-picked candidate to defeat him in the Republican primary. Another statement of rejection of Trumpism by Republicans in Georgia. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock opening a very early lead over Republican Herschel Walker. We'll see how and if that changes as more votes come in from key counties in the Peach State. We're live at ballot counting centers. We're going to have more results. That's ahead. Stay with us. I have a key race alert for you now with about 31% of the vote in. Incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock is ahead in the race for the Senate, 63.2%. Oh, I'm sorry, 62.9%. More votes are still coming in, 62.9% to Republican Herschel Walker's 37.1%. Raphael Warnock right now in this early vote that is expected to be overwhelmingly Democrat, 276,000, almost 277,000 votes ahead of Herschel Walker. And again, as we've said, John King, here at the Magic Wall, we expected that he would be in the lead. He was a month ago. And the question is he going to be able to maintain a lead, certainly not this lead, as votes from today come in?
Right, and that is the challenge. Again, the Republicans are reasonably confident enough voters turned out today to give Herschel Walker the chance to catch up. The question is, did they vote for Walker by the right proportions? They need somewhere in the ballpark of 60% of the vote was all what their data people were telling them. But you're looking at this big number right now, 277,000 vote lead. You think, wow, right? And I just say, yes, that's wow, and it's what Senator Warnock needs to do, but it's also a wait as we get more. Why is it so big? Because you see it's starting to fill in around Atlanta. Fulton County's Atlanta in the middle. Cobb County just had a large report of votes. You see right there, 186,000 and change to 47,000. This is why. This is why that lead just stretched the way you did, because of this giant report of early vote from Cobb County. So it's a Democratic county, and the early vote is disproportionately Democratic. So this is what you need to do if you're the Warnock campaign, but you also know there are a lot of votes still to be counted. So that's Cobb County. Let's just do the loop around Atlanta, if you will. Fulton County is Atlanta and the suburbs to the south and the north as you go up. Again, this is the base, the largest county in the state. It's the base of the Democratic Party. That's where Senator Warnock needs to be, as close to 80% as he can be when we're done with the count. If a Democrat is going to win, you need to keep that. This is essentially the Philadelphia. You're from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This is your Philadelphia right here. You need to. This is where the Democrats need to run it up to be competitive in a close race. And at the moment, in the early vote, that's happening. So then you come over here to Gwinnett, the second largest county in the state, just shy of 9% of the state population. And again, this is 68%, 69% if you were to round up. If we go back a month ago, it was 59%. So he's overperforming where he was a month ago right now. But this, again, is early vote. So we have to see if that percentage holds up when we get more Election Day vote. I would say that, history tells you it won't hold up that strong I just pulled out to show it again because now you're looking at 261,000 vote early lead. That's impressive. That's impressive. But as we watched the seesaw a month ago, Warnock pulled out, Walker came back, then they seesawed throughout the night. So we have a long way to go. If you're the Democrat, you know your foundation is build a big lead with the early vote. That's what's happening. The question is, what comes next?
Is it enough of one? Go to Cobb County because our own Nick Valencia is in Marietta, Georgia, in Cobb County, and he's with a county election official. We can ask him some questions. But Nick, tell us what's going on there in Cobb County.
We're at the Cobb County Center of Elections where those votes are starting to be tabulated already, Jake. And we want to bring in here the chairwoman of the Cobb County Board of Elections, Tori Silas. Tori, thank you so much for taking the time with CNN. We know you're extremely busy. You're actually working tonight. I know that you can't give us numbers from today. You don't have those, but you do have numbers already. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we had early voting, advanced in-person early voting that began on the 26th, Saturday the 26th, and concluded on December the 2nd. And so we do have those numbers, but we can't begin the tabulation process, obviously, until the conclusion of voting on Election Day.
So how soon will we see some of those first numbers start to come out from Cobb County from today?
Yes, from today, it will probably be about 7:45, maybe around 8 o'clock. We have 147 precincts across Cobb County. Once the poll managers and the poll workers close down those locations, they will then bring all of their equipment back, but they also bring media memory cards that have the tabulation on there.
I want to ask you if there's any, issues that you saw today, but first, kind of walk me through what we're seeing behind here, because this is pretty fascinating here for the viewer.
Fascinating is a very good word for it, but yeah, it's very busy. And so this is essentially, this area here is where we are scanning absentee ballots. And so I shared with you earlier when we had an opportunity to talk. In Cobb County, we issued over 24,000 absentee ballots. Obviously, over the course of, we started mailing them out on 21st of November. That was the date that the general election results were certified. So that was the first day that we could mail ballots, absentee ballots out. Those ballots then began to come back in. We hold them, and then we scan them in this area here.
Great, Tori. And I know you don't have, you can't hear the anchors, but they want to ask you some questions. John King and Jake Tapper. John, go ahead, and I'll just reiterate what you want to ask.
Well, two questions. Number one, because you only have the one big race tonight, what time do you think you'll be done? You said you'll have your first Election Day votes sometime in the next 15 or 20 minutes.
One big race tonight.
That's fast counting, so that's impressive. When will you be done with everything?
Well, I'm hopeful it will be much earlier than the general election because we didn't leave this office, myself, other board members, and of course our poll workers. We did not leave until after 3 a.m. But one big race, I'm hopeful that we will leave here prior to midnight.
And you're working tonight too. You're a board of 5, and you're, throwing your hands, you're throwing the hat in work here.
Yeah, absolutely. We are a board of 5. A number of us were recently appointed last July. Actually, in the background, you'll see one of our other board members there, but we are a working board. That's correct.
Jake, do you have any questions for Tori here while we have her?
I just wondered how the vote turned out, the vote turnout looked. If you look at this runoff from, so the early vote plus today, compared to early vote and Election Day a month ago, whether she thinks that the numbers will be similar or perhaps a little lower today.
So do you think the numbers will be similar to what we saw in November, just from what you're seeing so far today?
When you look at total numbers, I actually think, depending upon Election Day results or the numbers will actually be higher in as much that,
higher? Wow.
Well, to the extent that we had record turnout for advance in-person voting, such that we had more individuals here in Cobb County, as well as across the entire state, that voted advance in-person during the runoff, as opposed to the advanced in-person numbers during the general election.
And the last question I have, a tight turnaround for you guys. You had 9 weeks from the runoff last time, this time 4 weeks.
That's correct.
How are you guys doing?
We're hanging in.
Yeah, okay.
We're hanging in.
I appreciate it, Tori. You go get back to work. Jake, John, we'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Nick. Please thank her for us for the hard work that she and all of the election workers do. So important. Let's go to David Chalian now at the Battleground Desk. David, give us more perspective on the votes that are in so far.
Yeah, so here is the state of play at the moment. You see Raphael Warnock with 539,822 votes. Herschel Walker, 435,004 votes. We think about 35% of the overall vote has been tabulated and is represented here. But here's what's important to pay attention to. How much of this vote that is in is that early vote that you and John are talking about, that pre-election vote, early in person, by mail vote. Well, right now our estimate is that 97% of all the votes you're seeing are early vote, pre-election vote. And we know that tends to favor the Democrat. What do we expect that to be at the end of the night in terms of the overall share? Well, we think the early vote, the pre-election vote, is only going to make up 55%. A slim majority of voters in this runoff will have cast their vote early, is our estimate. But again, right now, 97% of the votes you're looking at are early. That's going to come down to 55% as an overall share. When it does, that could benefit Herschel Walker if indeed he gets his election day turnout operation at the level that the campaign is looking.
All right, David Chang, thanks so much. We're keeping a close watch on vote counting centers in key Georgia counties. A lot of ballots still to be tabulated and reported in this critical Senate runoff. More results ahead. We'll be right back. And we have a key race alert for you now. With 31% of the vote in, incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock currently leads with 55.7% of the vote, ahead of Republican Herschel Walker, who has 44.3% of the vote. Raphael Warnock currently ahead with 122,265 more votes than Herschel Walker, but most of the vote is outstanding, so this is just an early result, not necessarily indicative of where we're going to end up. Let's get an update right now on the vote in Georgia's most populous county. Diane Gallagher is at a vote counting location in Fulton County, Georgia. Diane, tell us more of what you're seeing.
Yeah, Jake, so we're starting to see at least materials arrive. They might be some of the election day ballots from those delivery persons, bringing them through, those people who are essentially going and picking them up. They can't go in their personal vehicle again for security purposes, and they're taking them from each of the 249 precincts. They then bring them to a regional office, and that regional office puts that all together with security, and then they bring it here to this central location where the cards from those machines are then uploaded into the system, and then you can refresh them just like I'm doing right now to see as things are coming in. Now, look, Fulton County was one of the first to upload most of their early in-person ballots. More than 184,000 of those have already been uploaded into their system. They say they have around 14,000 absentee ballots, those ones through mail that they also have to go through and upload those. And then, look, the officials told us that they had more than 70,000 in-person votes on election day today. I asked kind of to describe how they thought that was on their expectation. They called it a very healthy turnout. They noted that, again, it was very difficult to put together this 4-week runoff period, but they were very impressed by the turnout that they saw. We're looking at, between the absentee ballots and, of course, the early in-person voting, more than 200,000 votes there before Election Day. They say that they expect to have all of those results in still tonight, Election Day, absentee and early ballots, by midnight tonight. Jake, we expect most of the ballot deliveries to happen between 8 and 9 p.m. tonight, because it's a process. You've got to go through, you've got to check and make sure everything is not just secure, but you dot your I's and cross your T's, and they've got to drive to this location. There is security at almost every single point where they can be, for personal security and also ballot security. When they come in here, I'm told they'll also be escorted by police as they're coming in here to go and upload it. You can't see the machine they're uploading it in, but it is at the back of this warehouse that I'm in here. They'll do that, and again, you'll see it right there on your screen as it comes up.
Thanks, Jake. And, when we're listening to Diane talk about the early voting versus the voting today, it makes me think of a conversation I had with a Republican who's working on this race, who was talking about the fact that it has been so frustrating for so many Republican operatives that they haven't been able to get out the vote early, that they can't match what Democrats are doing when it comes to absentee voting and when it comes to early voting. In all elections, but especially this one of the reasons is because they were totally outmatched when it comes to money.
Yeah, this is the second cycle now that Republicans have been dealing with this problem, and it's becoming an organizing issue. They're not able to, first of all, help people who want the convenience of being able to vote on their own time do that. They're not able to do that as effectively. And then the other reason is that once people have voted, then you could go and find the people who haven't voted and get them out. Now they're in a situation where the Monday before Election Day, they're praying that everybody gets up, leaves their home, goes out on Election Day and votes, and they do not have a backstop.
And how many times have you heard from Republican operatives, either at the RNC or elsewhere, over the years, many years, saying, we're going to work on this, we're going to change the way Republicans vote? And one of the reasons they have been stymied in that is because of Donald Trump.
Yeah, no question
because
about
he
it.
spent so long saying, don't vote by mail, don't do early voting, and it really got into the bloodstream.
And this is really going to, if things don't work out for Herschel Walker here, this is going to be one of the areas in which they will point fingers at their failure to get the early vote out, their failure to vote by mail, effectively to demonize and demagogue vote by mail. Kevin McCarthy, for one, Republican leader on the House side, has tried to push back against Donald Trump, at least in the last election cycle, not to say these things about vote by mail, but so much about this race, too, will be about, of course, where do suburban voters come down? I mean, a lot of the conservative voters in these suburbs, the Walker campaign wants to show that this is about getting a Republican seat. Ignore the flaws, ignore those concerns. We need another Republican as a check on Joe Biden. Warnock's campaign has all been about going after questions, raising questions about his character. And when I was in the Atlanta suburbs about a month before the election, interviewing Republican voters, that was one of the things that many of them were convinced that Walker simply was not qualified to do the job. That argument seemed to have worked with a number of Republican voters. Now, will that have changed from then until now? We'll see.
And Walker has had so much money to play with to amplify that message.
And you know what's so interesting? As you talk to even
Warnock
Democrats, they want to, they have been wanting Georgia to become a purple state. But even to this day, a lot of Democrats are not totally sure that that's what's quite going on here. A lot of Democrats still think Georgia is a kind of so-so state in terms of their chances of actually doing well on a consistent basis there. But what has been happening over the last two cycles is that the Trump factor is very strong. This is a diversifying state where you have people moving into the suburbs, moving into the states from other parts of the country, younger people, people of color, not just Black people, but also Latinos and Asian voters as well. And that is creating conditions that are frankly hostile to Trumpism. There is a reason that two very high-profile figures who pushed back on Trump won their elections handily. That's the Governor Brian Kemp and also Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Voters in the suburbs of states like Georgia that are moving toward the purple category do not like the politics that has been represented by Trump. And the question tonight is Herschel Walker going to be hurt by that, or are some voters going to put that aside and say, okay, other things are more important. Maybe we do want to check on Joe.
All you need to do is look at the huge margins that both Governor Kemp and Brad Raffensperger won by. I mean, Raffensperger is the guy on the tape with Donald Trump pushing back.
And made famous by Trump.
Exactly.
And yet they won.
And why was Donald Trump not here in the final days of the campaign? Because
they said, no, thank you, sir.
Exactly. They realized that. Trump was, when you look back at this election cycle, Trump was in Nevada late in the election cycle. He was in Pennsylvania late in the election cycle. They lost those races. The Walker campaign recognized that. They didn't want Trump there late.
No, they didn't. But, another thing that I've heard a little bit of, concern about, a little hard feelings, I should say, is probably the best way to say it, is that Herschel Walker is Donald Trump's candidate. There's no question about it. And yet now at the 11th hour in this runoff, Donald Trump, yes, they didn't want him to come in and campaign, but they would have liked some money from his super PAC, and that didn't happen. Because again, Raphael Warnock, a Republican, said to me today, they have not seen a candidate able to fundraise the way Raphael Warnock can in forever.
Yeah, well, if you're waiting for Donald Trump to hand over some money, you might be waiting for a long time. He is not one known to hand over the cash, especially not in a situation like this where he's not being embraced with open arms. But just for a moment on Raphael Warnock, I mean, it's not just Warnock. He is perhaps the ideal Democratic candidate for this state. He is pastoring Martin Luther King Jr.'s church. He is an authentic figure for the state. He is an organizer. He has the support of the party. And and has been a unifying figure for the party. But there has been, years and years of Democratic work on the ground in Georgia that could be paying off. Just the fact that they're in a runoff means it has paid off.
That's a really, really important point. Jake?
Thanks, Dana. Let's go to David Shelley now at the Battleground Desk with some information about the votes that we're seeing out of Cobb County.
Yeah, Jake. So as you and John were talking about Cobb County earlier, some votes came in, and it was a much larger vote total than we anticipated. And so we did some double checking, and with the system, the National Election Pool that provides the vote counting that you're seeing all night long to all the broadcast networks, what we discovered is there was a reporting error. It's a human being process here. So the reporter on the ground mistakenly reported the wrong numbers. Now, you and John at the wall have the correct Cobb County numbers. You'll see a lower vote total overall than anticipated because we have double checked all of these numbers to make sure what is now in our system is indeed the Cobb County total that has been reported. And we just wanted to be transparent and clear with everyone at home who was tracking the vote while you guys were talking about Cobb County. That error in reporting from on the ground in Cobb County, again, feeds into the system that feeds these vote reports to all of the broadcast networks. That has now been corrected, and you have the current Cobb County vote total in the wall there, guys.
All right, David Shelley, thanks so much. So what is the actual number here, John Kemp?
This is the Cobb County number we have so far, 67% to 33%, or 44,525 to 21,736, a much smaller number here. And in the age we live in, everything should be triple and quadruple checked before it's fed into the system, just because of the conspiracies and the mistrust out there. This is the good number now. It has been solid. So what does that mean? That means Senator Warnock, in the early vote in a key Democratic county, has a big lead, right? So if we go back in time 1 month ago, in the Senate race, he got 57% in Cobb County.
But that was the final.
That was the final number.
This is the early.
And so this, if he stays there, then he's reelected. We expect Herschel Walker will get more competitive as election day votes come in. If Senator Warnock stays above 60% in Cobb County, he is most likely to be reelected. But again, we think this is about a quarter of the vote, somewhere around there. So we have a ways to go. So now you pull out the statewide, and what do you see since the last time we were here? Number one, you see a lot more of the map filling in. Again, predominantly the early vote. So even in these places, this is key for Herschel Walker. These are small rural counties, not a lot of people, but these are absolutely key for the Republicans, right? And you see, this is Coffee County, which, you're going to make the joke with me, so I'll get ahead of you. It's next to Bacon County. As we walk through these, as we go through, it's very, very important. But see, 70%, right? 70% if you round up. If you go back a month ago, he was just above 71%, a little bit more. It's key as we watch the rest of the night fill in. If this is predominantly early vote and Herschel Walker's running there, then maybe that's a chance he juices that up a little, juices that percentage up a little bit, right? That's a possibility. We don't know that. But that's what you're looking for as you go through these counties, because that was the question. On Election Day, Republicans need to dominate. They need probably 60% of the Election Day vote, the votes cast today. And if you add up all of these counties, that's what you use to counter up here, because many more people live up here. Again, in Gwinnett County, Senator Warnock getting 69% so far. A month ago, he was 10 points below that. Again, this is early vote, right? This is early vote. So the Democrats are doing, the performance numbers look pretty solid in the percentages for the Democrats. The question is, as we get deeper in the night, we have a better understanding about the total turnout. Then you start running, what's the today vote? What's the early vote? And that's where it's competitive. Again, the Republicans believe enough voters turned out today for them to make up the difference. The question is, did 6 in 10 of them, somewhere in that ballpark, vote for Herschel Walker? We think we're at about 40% of the estimated vote. 147,000 vote lead, 10-point difference. We keep counting. Long way to go.
Anything could happen. Anything could happen. More than a third of the vote is in from Georgia. We're standing by for critical results from ballots that were cast today that could change the race as it looks as of right now. We'll also get an update from a top Georgia election official. Gabe Sterling is standing by. There's much more ahead. Stay with us.